Hey friends, before we dive into tonight's story, did you know that nearly 80% of the people who watch these videos aren't subscribed? If you're enjoying this kind of content, consider hitting the subscribe button. It really helps a lot, and it keeps these long stories going. Also, I'd love to hear from you. What time is it right now where you are, and which city are you listening from tonight? And if these stories help you sleep, feel free to tap the thanks button to support the channel. It truly means a lot. All right, let's get into it. My name is Marcus Hale. I'm a deputy sheriff, and I've been working these lonely roads for years. I know that nothing good happens after dark. Tonight, I got a call on the radio. Just beyond the old Milligan barn on County Road 47, a car's headlights had suddenly gone out. No further information came from headquarters. No broken calls, no screams, just a driver in panic who saw someone crash a pickup truck into the fence and then crawl away into the trees. I flipped on the cruiser's overhead lights for just a moment, then shut them off again so only the dash glow cut through the windshield. Frost was already forming in the corners of the glass, and I rubbed at it with gloved fingers as I steered onto the gravel shoulder where the road met the unmarked turnoff. The utility pole there flickered on and off, a single bulb struggling against the night, casting long shadows that danced across the field. I killed the engine and unshouldered my flashlight and service weapon, the beam of the light slicing through the darkness like an accusation. Stepping onto loose stones, my boots crunched and rolled underfoot. I followed a single set of tire tracks that led toward the Milligan barn. Tracks so fresh, the disturbed gravel still yielded steam into the cold air. The barn itself was little more than weathered boards and rusted tin, sagging in the middle like it couldn't carry its own weight anymore. The side door hung open on broken hinges, revealing a yawning darkness inside. I could taste the metallic tang of fear in my mouth before I even crossed the threshold. Inside the barn, the smell was thick with old hay, damp earth, and something else. Coppery, sharp, like blood. The light from my flashlight caught swaying cobwebs and the dusty outline of empty stalls. An old feed trough lay overturned near the center, wood splintered as though something heavy had been thrown. No sign of a body, no footprints in the loose dirt, nothing but the echo of my own breathing. I called out, "County Sheriff's Office, if anyone's in here, show yourself." The beam of my flashlight swept the rafters, and rafters only answered with low creaks. I stepped back out into the open, cold wind, biting through every layer I'd piled on. The silver pickup was down in a shallow gully, front end crumpled against a fence post that lay broken across the hood. The driver's side door was open, and I could see a coffee thermos lying on the seat, lid off, and coffee sloshed onto the floor mat. I lifted the thermos and saw it was empty, condensation on the outside from the chill. No one around. I radioed dispatch with the plate number, stolen vehicle, linked to a missing man named Owen Carlisle, who vanished during a camping trip 2 weeks ago. The link was too direct to ignore. My breath rose in clouds as I closed the door gently and walked toward the farmhouse where the missing man's family still waited. But the tracks led away from the barn and across an open field toward a lone farmhouse. I pulled my coat tighter and followed, the beam of my flashlight bouncing over fence lines and low shrubs. The house sat under a dim porch lamp, its bulb flickering once, twice, then steadier. I felt that familiar knot in my gut, the one that turns my hands clammy and throat dry. Something about this whole scene didn't line up. I climbed the sagging steps and pushed on the screen door. It rattled on its frame, then swung inward. Inside, the air was stale. Stale as if it hadn't been lived in for years. The past owner wired in a landline alarm that blared headache-inducing buzzes if triggered, but the sound was eerily absent. Instead, the living room was empty, save for an antique sofa and a fireplace stuffed with old newspapers. On the mantel rested a single framed photograph. An elderly woman, her lined face creased into a gentle smile. Beneath it, a small brass bell lay on its side, cord still attached. I called out again, "Anyone here, please respond, Sheriff's Office." My voice echoed off the peeling wallpaper, and the silence swallowed it whole. As I moved through the room, the bracelet on my wrist clicked softly against my vest. In the hallway, a pair of footprints in fine dust led up the stairs. 2 prints, one larger, one smaller, but both unmistakably human. The floorboards groaned beneath my weight as I approached the stairwell. Every instinct screamed to wait for backup, but I could almost feel the person ahead of me, breathless and maybe hurt. At the top of the stairs, the second-floor hallway stretched before me, 4 doors on each side, shadows pooling at their bases. A faint glow spilled from the last door on the right, cool blue, like a phone screen left unlocked. I shut the door behind me quietly, the latch clicking. My hand tightened around the flashlight handle. I called, voice low, "Deputy Hale, I'm here to help. Step away from whatever you're doing." Static crackled from my radio in response, and I realized I'd left it on my belt below. I drew closer to the lit doorway. The light flickered through the cracked paint of the doorframe, as though whatever device was inside was cutting in and out. My shoes made no sound on the thick carpet, which was patterned with muted flowers that had once been bright. I hesitated, then eased the door open with my foot. The room was small, barely enough space for an armchair and a side table. The chair faced the corner, and on the seat sat a smartphone, screen glowing with a live camera view of the hallway behind me. My heart hit my ribs like a hammer. Around the chair, pinned to the walls with black tacks, were dozens of Polaroid photos. Me at the coffee shop fueling up, me walking my patrol route past the schoolyard, me at dispatch checking in. Each photo had a date and time scrawled beneath it, some weeks old, some earlier tonight. My own face stared back at me, framed in crisp white borders. Beneath them, in red ink, someone had written the words pattern and frequency. A floorboard creaked hard behind me. I whipped the flashlight around, beam cutting a pale arc across the dark hallway. A tall silhouette stood framed in the stairwell. It was Deputy Eric Nolan, my partner for the past 3 years, and someone I trusted with my life. Only his eyes glowed in the beam, empty and flat. His hand rested on the butt of his service pistol, but the barrel was pointed upward, not at me. He smiled, slow, and that same phone in the chair shut off, the glow vanishing. The silence stretched between us and the cold seeped back into my bones. Nolan took 1 step forward. "You always said we watch each other's backs," he said, voice raw. But who was watching mine when I needed help? My pulse pounded as I raised my flashlight like a shield. Nolan hesitated, jaw working. I realized then that the fallout from unspoken calls for help, ones lost in protocol, could be more dangerous than any storm. He took another step. Behind him, the door clicked shut, and in that instant I knew this night was only beginning. I climbed into the patrol car just after midnight, the heater sputtering weakly against the cold that settled into my bones. My name is Deputy Marcus Hale, and I've been on these roads long enough to know that nothing good ever happens after dark. The dash lights glowed dimly, casting long shadows across the cracked vinyl seat. Outside, the world lay under a thin layer of frost that glittered like shattered glass beneath the streetlights. I took a steadying breath, my breath clouding in the cramped cab, and tapped the radio button. "Dispatch, Hale." My voice came out thicker than I intended. "What do we have?" A crackling pause, then the dispatcher's calm voice. Caller reporting headlights swerving off County Road 47, just past the unused Milligan barn. No further detail. Caller hung up. Plate came back stolen. Name on the report is Owen Carlisle. Reported missing 2 weeks ago after failing to return from a solo camping trip. I nodded to myself even though no one else was there to see. 2 weeks was a long time to be out in this cold. Copy that. I'm 10 miles north. I'll check it out. I shifted the vehicle into gear. The engine growled, muffled by the cab walls. Back roads at this hour were empty. No headlights in the distance, no other cruisers out here, just me and the moon draped low across the sky. My boots crunched on the gravel shoulder as I exited the car, flashlight and service weapon in hand. The utility pole by the field entrance flickered on and off, casting the world in pulses of dim orange light. For a moment, that lone bulb felt like a heartbeat, alive and failing all at once. Loose stones rattled underfoot as I followed fresh tire tracks that carved a winding path toward the Milligan barn. The gravel gave way to churned dirt, frozen in ridges that pressed into the soles of my boots. My breath came in quick puffs, and I could feel the old ache in my hip flare up with every step. The barn sat at the edge of a pasture, its boards bleached and warped by years of sun and rain. A rusted tin roof sagged in the middle, and the side door hung on one hinge like a broken jaw. No interior lights, no sound but the distant hum of traffic miles away on the highway. I paused at the threshold and took a slow, measured breath. My flashlight beam pierced the darkness, illuminating hay-strewn floors and broken stalls. Dust motes floated in the beam like tiny spirits drifting through the gloom. The smell hit me first. Mildew, rotting straw, and something coppery, sharp and unmistakable. My pulse jumped. That odor wasn't part of the old barn, it was fresh. Something had bled here recently. I called out in a firm voice, "County Sheriff's Office, if anyone's in here, show yourself." My words echoed off the rafters, swallowed by the heavy silence. I swept my light across the stalls. No bodies, no movement. Just the whisper of wood settling in the cold. I kept moving, boots crunching, heart hammering. My flashlight caught a fleck of red on splintered wood near the back stall. A drop of dark fluid glistened in the beam. I swallowed hard. Had someone injured themselves crashing that pickup? I backed out and closed the door quietly, listening for sounds that weren't there. Out in the field, the air stung my lungs. I walked to the gully where the silver pickup lay half buried in snow. Its hood crumpled around a fence post that had snapped beneath the impact. The grill was twisted metal and shattered glass. The driver's door stood open, as though the occupant had fled on foot. On the seat, a stainless steel coffee thermos lay tipped over, its lid off. I picked it up. Empty, but it still had warmth from hot coffee earlier in the night. Whoever was here hadn't lingered. I radioed dispatch. "I've located the vehicle. Stolen plate matches Owen Carlisle. No sign of him. Tracks lead off westbound toward the old farmhouse on Maple Road." "Copy that. Nearest unit is 30 minutes out in clear weather," the dispatcher warned. Clear weather or snowstorm, my thoughts echoed. The forecast had called for flurries, but I hadn't seen a single flake. Sometimes, though, storms had a way of hiding until they hit you. I clicked off the radio and pocketed the handset. If those tracks were fresh, I needed to follow them now. I moved across the frozen field, flashlight beam cutting through low-hanging branches. My jacket muffled the sound of twigs snapping. The farmhouse appeared under a wan glow from a porch light. A modest, two-story structure with peeling white paint and an overgrown yard. The porch lamp pulsed, casting wavering light onto chipped steps. I approached quietly, ears straining for any hint of movement inside. The screen door rattled on its hinges when I nudged it. Inside, the air felt stale, hardly warmer than outside. Dust motes danced in the beam as I swept the living room. An old sofa twisted around the coffee table, a cast-iron stove cold and empty, and newspapers scattered across the floor like fallen leaves. I spotted the landline phone off the hook, cord curled limp. The usual blare of a faulty alarm system was absent, which only made the silence deeper, heavier. I called out in a low voice, "Deputy Hale, Pine Creek County. If anyone's here, make yourself known." My words felt fragile in the empty room. Behind me, the front door hung ajar, letting cold seep inside in slow tendrils. I felt that familiar knot tighten in my gut, an instinct I'd trusted for years. The house felt wrong, as if someone had been waiting for me. In the hallway, a fresh set of footprints in the dust caught my eye, barely the width of a hiking boot, leading straight up the stairs. No return prints. My hand closed around the grip of my flashlight, knuckles white. The first step groaned under my weight. I paused halfway up, listening. Nothing but the soft echo of my own breathing. I told myself to wait for backup. I knew protocol, but the thought of Carlisle or whoever was hurt, left alone in the dark, made me climb. At the top, the hallway stretched before me, 4 doors on each side. The floorboards were worn smooth by decades of footsteps, and the wallpaper peeled in curling strips. A faint blue glow seeped under the last door on the right. A phone screen, left unlocked, or maybe streaming. I swallowed hard. Something about that glow felt deliberate, like a beacon. My heart thudded so loudly I thought it might echo down the hall. I whispered, "This is Deputy Hale. I have a gun, and I'm not afraid to use it. Come out with your hands up." My words trembled, and I imagined the ripple of panic they might cause. The door's edge showed scratch marks, as though it had been forced closed. I eased it open with my toe. The room was small, barely big enough for a single chair and a side table. The phone sat on the chair, screen on, broadcasting a live view of the hallway behind me. My own silhouette filled the display. Around the phone, Polaroid photos were tacked in rough rows. Me on patrol, me fueling my cruiser, me speaking into this very radio. Each photo had a date and time scrawled beneath, some weeks old, some within hours. Beneath one picture, someone had written, "Pattern," in red ink. I spun on my heel, flashlight beam sweeping the corridor. Silence. Then behind me, a creak, the slow, deliberate sound of a floorboard giving way. I aimed the light. There, framed in the stairwell, stood a tall figure. It was Deputy Eric Nolan, my partner of 3 years. Only his eyes were hollower than I'd ever seen. He held his service pistol pointed not at me but down, barrel aiming at the carpet. He took one step forward, voice low and tight. "You said you had my back," he said, breath clouding in the cold air. "But when I called for help, you never answered." The hallway felt smaller, the air sharper. My flashlight trembled in my hand as I realized the man I'd trusted was now the thing I feared most. My flashlight beam trembled as I stared at Nolan's empty eyes. His face was pale in the weak glow, jaw clenched tight as though he'd bitten down on a blade. I swallowed hard, every muscle coiled for what came next. In the silence, I could hear my own heartbeat pounding in my ears, heavy as a hammer. He took another step forward, slow and deliberate, hands hanging by his sides. "You always told me to count on you," Nolan said, voice low and hoarse. "That's what partners do, but you never came when I needed you most." A knot tightened in my stomach. I'd missed the call that night he'd nearly died. Back then, I'd thought he was tossing aside another complaint about paperwork or training. I'd never considered how close he'd come to slipping through the cracks. Now, I realized, too late, that my oversight had festered into something far deadlier. I inhaled slowly, fighting the urge to raise my weapon. "Eric, He cut me off, hands rising as if to push me away. "Don't lie," he whispered. "I watched you every day after that, watched you patrol, watched you joke around with the others, watched you ignore my code calls." His eyes glistened. "You made the choice to leave me hanging." My flashlight's beam wavered as my grip loosened. I took a small step backward, the faded carpet muffling my boots. "Nolan," I said softly. "I'm sorry, I didn't—" He advanced another step. "You don't get to be sorry," he said, voice cracking. "You get to feel the same fear I felt." His hands curled into fists, knuckles white. I forced myself to stay calm, to think. I needed to buy time, find a way to de-escalate. "Look, Eric, we can talk about this. You're hurt, mentally and maybe physically. We can get you help." His shoulders shook, and for a moment I thought he might lower the tension between us. Then his face twisted, and he swung an arm out. I dodged instinctively, the beam slicing across the far wall, illuminating more Polaroids. They weren't just of me now. There were pictures of him too. Nolan at training, Nolan at home unloading groceries, Nolan laughing at a party, Nolan on his motorcycle. Beneath each, someone had scrawled notes. Vulnerable, alone, abandoned. My throat tightened. Whoever had set this up had known both of us intimately, knew our habits, our fears. In that narrow hallway, the walls closed in until I felt trapped between my partner's anger and my own guilt. Nolan's breathing was ragged. He reached inside his uniform jacket and pulled out a small tape recorder. He clicked it on, and static filled the room. Then I heard my own voice, recorded snippets from our morning briefings. "Check. On Nolan after roll call. Get him to counseling. Don't leave him alone." My words, my own admission of concern, blared back at me. I stumbled back, heart slamming against my ribs. Nolan moved to place the recorder on the chair, arranging it next to a Polaroid of me patting him on the shoulder after a tough shift. "I documented everything," he said quietly. "Every time you promised to be there, every time you left me standing." The recorder clicked off. I licked my lips, struggling for breath. "Eric, you're not thinking straight." He shook his head. "You don't know what it's like to be forgotten." He swept a hand toward the walls. "So, I showed you. I made you the subject of your own case file." My mind raced. If I didn't find a way out, Nolan might get desperate. The narrow hall left few options. I thought of the door behind me, of the stairs leading down, of the radio clipped to my belt somewhere below. I needed distance. I needed to regroup. I raised my hands, palms out. "Okay," I said slowly. "All right, let's talk. We'll go back to the living room, we'll sit down, you tell me everything." It was a gamble, giving up the hallway's choke point for the openness of the room. But Nolan seemed torn, the fire in his eyes sputtering at my concession. He eyed me warily. "You'd do that?" My heart pounded. Yes." He took a step back, tension easing slightly. I inched past him, moving toward the stairwell. Every slow footfall echoed on the wood floor. I felt the draft from the open front door downstairs. Cool air beckoned. Just as I reached the bottom step, Nolan lunged. My shirt snagged on a nail by the banister as he barreled forward. I yanked free, stumbling into the foyer. My flashlight clattered to the floor, beam flickering across the room. I dropped my weapon in surprise, hands reaching for anything. Nolan's silhouette filled the stairwell behind me. "No more running," he snarled. He pressed the tape recorder against my chest. "Listen to this." I grasped the device, hand shaking so badly I almost dropped it. Voice crackled in my ear. My voice again, pleading with dispatch to check on Nolan, promising follow-up care. A looped clip of my own promises, my own words, became an accusation in his hand. My back hit the wall. I swallowed. "Eric, that's not fair. I tried." He stepped closer. "You tried to keep me in the dark," he whispered. "You gave me answers that never came." In that moment, I saw the years of strain in his posture, the rounded shoulders, the clenched jaw, the tears he'd swallowed. He believed I'd failed him. Under that weight, he'd built this trap, turned our partnership into evidence against me. I needed to break through. "Eric," I said quietly, pressing palms flat against the peeling wallpaper. "I'm here now. You want acknowledgement? Here it is. I've failed you, and I'm sorry. But we can fix this. We can walk out of here alive." He hesitated, the anger flickering in his eyes. For a heartbeat, I thought my words might reach him. Then a distant rumble shook the house, faint but unmistakable. I froze. The sound came again, louder this time, gravel crunching outside. Nolan's head snapped toward the window. "Back up," he rasped. Panic flared. He shoved me hard. I stumbled past the chair, nearly toppling it. The tape recorder slid from my hand, skittering across the floor, and the phone on the chair lit up again, displaying my partner's face. My face, broadcast live. I landed against the front door, hand hitting the latch. Behind me, Nolan lunged. I yanked the door open and spilled onto the porch, cold air slamming into me like a wall. My flashlight lay on the floor inside, beam drifting out behind me. The gravel driveway glowed under approaching headlights. 2 cruisers, their lights off. Backup, relief and dread knotted together. I barely registered the yelp as Nolan's boots skidded onto the porch, knife drawn now, blade catching the dim porch lamp. His eyes locked on mine. Rage and hurt coiled in his stance. I backed up, stumbling over a broken board, heart pounding so hard I thought it would burst. The cruisers halted 20 feet away, engines idling. Through the windshield I could see the forms of Deputies Rogers and Vargas, stepping out, flashlights off, ready. But Nolan and I were still locked in that moment. 2 partners turned adversaries. He knocked the porch railing aside and advanced, bare ground crunching beneath him. My own hand hovered over my sidearm at my hip. I yelled, "Don't!" Rogers's voice came from the edge of the porch. "Hale?" "Rogers?" The siren of my radio crackled beneath my hand. Nolan hesitated, blade wavering. The faint flicker of recognition stretched across his face like a dying flame. He glanced toward the cruisers, toward Rogers, then back at me. For a second, I thought he might drop the knife. And then everything shifted. Nolan revved forward, propelled by something darker than anger, something like despair. I raised my weapon as Rogers and Vargas reached the porch. A single shot echoed, muffled by the weight of the night. Backup rushed forward, flashlight swinging, shouting my name. Nolan collapsed mid-stride, knife clattering on the boards. The light from the cruiser's headlights flooded the yard, exposing my shaking hands and Nolan's prone figure. I didn't lower my gun until Vargas had Nolan handcuffed. My breaths came ragged, my bones aching from adrenaline and cold. I looked at Nolan as Rogers led him down the steps. His head slumped, eyes unfocused. I sank onto the top step, staring at the dark doorway behind me, at the chair and the photos still taped to the wall. Thousands of moments frozen in glossy Polaroids, each one a reminder of how close fear can become betrayal when you ignore the calls for help. Dispatch's voice crackled through my radio. "Hale, are you all right? We have medics en route for suspect and your status." I pressed the radio to my lips, but said nothing. The only sound was my breath, shaking in clouds before me, and the distant rumble of wind through the dead trees. That night, I learned how quickly trust can shatter, and how long the pieces can cut into you afterward. And out there in the dark, past the glow of the porch light, I wondered what other lines I might cross before I ever felt safe again. I watched Deputy Nolan slip into the back of the ambulance, his shirt soaked through where the bullet struck. The medic pressed a gauze pad to his side as they lifted him onto the stretcher. I stood on the porch steps, boots scuffed against rotting wood, the wind howling through the trees like a warning I'd ignored. My hands were shaking so badly I nearly dropped my service weapon. I sank onto the top step, staring at the dark hallway behind me, at the Polaroids fluttering in the breeze moving through the open front door. "Deputy Hale?" Roger's voice cracked through the cold. He crouched beside me, concern etched across his face. "You okay?" I nodded, though I couldn't trust my own voice. My radio lay on the floor beside me, still warm. Dispatch had asked me to confirm my status 3 times. Finally, I keyed the mic. I'm okay. Send a tow for my cruiser. Rodeo it out of the gully." Rogers helped me to my feet and guided me away from the farmhouse. The wind tugged at my coat, and even though it was late January, it felt like a noon spring gale ripping at the flimsy barrier between safety and something darker. We trudged down the steps toward the driveway, where Vargas stood by the open back doors of the ambulance. Nolan's face was pale under the harsh interior lights. He met my gaze, and for a moment something flickered in his eyes. Regret, perhaps, or the realization of what he'd done. I swallowed hard. "I'm sorry," I said, voice low. "I never meant—" He cut me off with a trembling breath. "Just do your job." Then he turned away, and the medics wheeled him inside. Rogers closed the ambulance doors and looked at me. "What happened in there, Marcus?" I hesitated. The walls seemed to shrink around me, memories of Nolan's betrayal echoing with every heartbeat. "He set me up," I said finally. "He blamed me for ignoring his calls for help. He studied my life, used my own words against me." Roger's eyes widened. "He recorded you? Framed you like evidence?" I nodded. "Polaroids, video feed, taped my promises, my apologies, made it into a case file. Then he planned to make me the suspect." I shook my head as though trying to dislodge the images. "He nearly killed me." He put a hand on my shoulder. "You're safe now. We've got Nolan in custody. We'll sort this out." I leaned into his grip, exhaustion finally breaking through the adrenaline. "I don't feel safe," I admitted. "Not out here, not in this job." He frowned. "We'll get you some time off, counseling, whatever you need." I looked back at the house, its windows dark and empty, the flicker of a dying bulb in the porch lamp still pulsing. "I need to go back in there," I said, voice rough. "There's evidence, plans on that recorder, more photos." He had maps marked with other deputies' names. I need to find it all. Rogers sighed but nodded. "Okay, let's wait for the crime scene techs. They'll comb the place." With that settled, we moved back up the driveway. The cruiser lights flickered in the distance as the tow truck arrived. I watched Nolan's ambulance pull away, siren off, and wondered how many months, years, I'd spend reliving this night. The crime scene van's headlights swept across the yard like search beams, and I stood guard at the edge of the porch while Vogel, our tech, set up his evidence markers. He was methodical, slow, every print, every scrap of tape photographed and bagged. I lingered at the entryway, peering into the hallway where the confrontation began. The air felt colder inside, as though the house itself had absorbed Nolan's rage. Vogel snapped pictures of the chair and the phone, then picked up the discarded tape recorder. "Deputy Hale, this was yours?" He held it gingerly, as though it might explode. I nodded. He wanted me to listen. He wanted to prove I'd lied. He set it in an evidence bag. "We'll get it analyzed. Any additional footage, transcripts, photos, everything goes back to the lab." I followed him down the hallway, past the door where Nolan stood before lunging. The walls were splintered with where Nolan's boots had caught the wood when he charged. Dust clung to my pants as I kneeled to inspect the scuff marks. Vogel placed a marker beside each one. We moved from room to room. The staircase nicked, the landing grazed, the living room where Nolan had wrestled me. "Here." Vogel pointed to the corner by the mantel. Several Polaroids lay in a scattered pile. Nolan's face, me feeding deer at a wildlife stand, me late night at the station, me on the porch of my own house. Some had dates that didn't line up, pictures taken long before Nolan's incident, others from hours ago. Someone had gone to extraordinary lengths. "They're all time-stamped," I said, voice barely above a whisper. "By Nolan's phone." My gut clenched. He must have set this up weeks ago, stalking both of us, grabbing photos when we didn't notice. Vogel bagged them carefully. "We'll trace the prints on these tacks, on the tape. Maybe find evidence of who set the camera." He glanced at me. "You know, Deputy, betrayal like this, that's personal. It cuts deeper than any struggle with a suspect." I swallowed. "Yeah." The silence that followed was heavy. My mind drifted to that moment in the hallway when he held the recorder to my chest, played my own pleas back at me. The revulsion was still fresh. After the text finished, I slipped back onto the porch, now empty and echoing. The Polaroids fluttered in the wind, and I stooped to gather them, pressing each photo against my chest. The faces, mine, Nolan's, and others I recognized. Dispatchers, fellow deputies, even one of Roger's kids riding his bike after school. Beneath each scribbled note, "Target, at risk, missed check-in." I realized then Nolan hadn't just planned to kill me. He'd planned to expose every vulnerability in the department, to show that when someone cries for help, the system can fail them. My phone buzzed in my pocket. A text from Captain Ramirez. "Secure the scene. Get some rest. We'll debrief at first light." I typed back, "Understood." Then I looked at the farmhouse one last time. The moon had shifted, and the porch lamp had flickered out. In the sudden darkness, the house blockaded itself, a silhouette of broken wood and shadow. I shivered. I drove back to the station in the tow truck's lead, cruisers flashing lights reflecting in the rearview mirror. The roads were icy, but the tow handled the gully easily. I kept my eyes on the dark ribbon of highway ahead, every mile taking me further from the barn, further from Nolan's betrayal. At the station, I sat in my office long past dawn, inventorying the evidence Vogel had brought back. The photos, the recorder, Nolan's knife. A pile of paperwork grew on my desk, incident reports, disciplinary records, missing person files. I thumbed through Nolan's personnel file, commendations, training notes, a single entry about his hospitalization after that call I'd missed. He nearly died, complications from a heart condition we both knew he hid. I leaned back and closed my eyes. The fluorescent lights hummed overhead. My chest ached, and every muscle felt bruised, physically and mentally. I rubbed my temples, trying to push away the memory of Nolan's outstretched knife, his voice accusing me. How could I have been so blind? Captain Ramirez knocked and stepped in. His face was grim but steady. "You all right, Hale?" I opened my eyes. "I will be, eventually." He sat on the edge of my desk. "His condition's stable. He's comatose. Bullet severed an artery, but he'll live." I spoke with his wife. She's been calling, asking for you. My heart lurched. Families, always on the other end of a call. If it can happen to me or Nolan, it can happen to anyone. "I'll reach out tomorrow," I said, voice tight. Ramirez nodded. "Get some rest. We'll assign you support. Counseling, time off, whatever you need." I nodded, but I knew rest would be elusive. My sleep, when it came, would be haunted by the echo of footsteps on dust, the flash of a phone screen glowing in the dark, and Nolan's eyes, empty and accusing. I cleared my desk, filed the records, and left the station under a pale sky breaking into dawn. That night, I patrolled Maple Road again. Drove it slowly in a borrowed cruiser, lights off, radio volume low. The barns and farmhouses sat in silhouette against the stars. I half expected to see headlights veering off into the fields, or a door cracking open. But there was nothing. Only the wind snatching at my uniform, the faint crackle of the radio calling in check-ins. I stopped by the field turnout, the spot where the silver pickup had crashed. The gully was filled in now, tire tracks gone, replaced by fresh gravel. I stepped out and listened. The wind carried no footsteps, no cries, just the distant bleat of a cow. I shivered and turned away, sliding back behind the wheel. As I drove off, headlights cutting across the horizon, I realized that Maple Road was no longer just a stretch of pavement. It was a crucible where trust and betrayal met. And though Nolan lay in a hospital bed recovering, a part of me would never leave that barn behind. In the months that followed, the investigation spread further. Nolan's hidden cabin in the woods where he'd stored more evidence, journals detailing his plan to equalize the department, interviews with deputies whose names he circled, therapy records he'd stolen and manipulated. The department, once a family, was fractured, forced to rebuild around the cracks he'd exposed. But for me, the hardest part wasn't the paperwork or the testimony. It was knowing that in the dark, isolation breeds its own monsters. Out there, under the same cold sky, someone could be watching, waiting for the moment when trust falters. And when it does, even a deputy can find himself alone on a dark patrol road, vulnerable to the shadows carved by another's wounded heart. I left the station under a pale moon, its wan light barely illuminating the snow-dusted fields along Maple Road. My cruiser's heater was all but dead, and the cold seeped through the seams of my jacket, wrapping around my spine like an icy hand. Since that night at the Milligan farmhouse, everything had felt thinner. My resolve, my vigilance, even the darkness itself seemed sharper, as though ready to slice through my soul the moment I let my guard drop. The call came through just after 2:15 a.m. A silent alarm tripped at the old Jensen farmhouse, 3 miles down County Road 12. Jensen's was long vacant, left to rot after the family sold off the land 2 years ago. The alarm company recorded only a generic signal, Zone 3 breach, then dead air. No voice, no panic, no footsteps on the line, just the finality of a mechanical beep. I tapped the button on my mic. "Dispatch, Hale. I'm en route to the Jensen property." "Copy that," came the calm reply. "Units are tied up. ETA for backup 30 minutes if roads stay clear." I pressed my lips together. 30 minutes could mean the difference between someone inside needing help and finding nothing but footprints in the snow. I flicked on the cruiser's headlights and eased down the highway, watching the beam carve twin ribbons of light through the night. The Jensen farmhouse loomed at the end of a gravel lane, its silhouette visible against the horizon only by a faint glow of stars. No porch light, no movement. I killed the engine 50 feet from the front gate and stepped into the cold, boots sinking slightly into untouched snow. The only footprints were my own and the tire tracks I'd followed from the road. The air was so still I could hear my pulse in my ears. Thump, thump, thump. I unshouldered my flashlight and weapon, sweeping the beam across the fence posts and sagging gate. The fence was broken in one spot. Wires snapped and the post splintered. Footprints led through the gap, thudding softly over the gravel steps to the front stoop. I called out, "Deputy Hale, Pine Creek County. Anyone in here, come out now." The silence was immediate and complete, as if the woods themselves swallowed my words. Inside, the foyer was dark, except for moonlight filtering through grimy windows. Wallpaper peeled from the walls in curling strips, and the floor was littered with fallen plaster and debris. The stale odor of animal droppings mingled with the tang of rusted metal that reminded me of blood. I swept the beam across the staircase, the handrail scarred with deep gouges. Someone had ransacked this place. I moved into the living room, where the fireplace gaped emptily, its hearth stained black by soot and scattered ash. Broken furniture lay strewn in a chaotic pattern, a stained armchair on its side, a coffee table cracked in half. Polaroids lay in drifts on the floor, but the pictures looked different here. They were of Ruben Martinez, the missing migrant worker last seen near the river crossing a month ago. Scenes of him at the border shelter, then at the festival in town. Each photo had a notation: unseen, orphaned, invisible. Under the pictures, someone had written, "They forget us." My heart stuttered. Nolan's work or a copycat? This pattern, stalking, photographing, had been his alone. But now I found his methods twisted against another victim. I snapped several photos with my phone for the report and moved on. Flashlight beam dancing over the walls. In the kitchen, cabinets hung open, jars and cans tumbled across the floor. A single chair was pulled up to the counter, and on it sat an old laptop, its screen alive with a paused video feed. I leaned closer. The feed displayed the interior of the barn behind my own house, my home. My wife's car, parked empty, was visible through the window behind the laptop. The timestamp read 2 days ago, 11:42 p.m. I clenched my jaw. Whoever did this had broadened the scope, gone from me to the entire department, now reaching into my personal life. They wanted me off balance, consumed by fear that nowhere was safe. I flicked off the laptop and pocketed it as evidence, moving toward the back door. Footsteps in the snow led out to the barn, and I followed, breath shallow. The barn door creaked when I pushed it open, and the smell of horses, stale hay and manure, mixed with the metallic hint of blood again. A single boot print, deeper than the others, led to the tack room. I kicked open the door. Inside, a figure lay face down on a blanket, boots, jeans, dark jacket. I radioed in. "Dispatch, Hale. Possible trespasser down. I need medical. ETA for EMS. Still 30 minutes, Hale," the dispatcher replied. Concern laced the reply. "Are you okay?" I hesitated. My voice felt brittle. I'm fine." I knelt beside the figure and checked for a pulse, weak but present. A dribble of blood from the ear. I unzipped the jacket to reveal a handwritten journal, pages marked with dates and names, rubber-stamped entries for Martinez, for myself, for Nolan. Then a final entry: midnight, Maple Road, alone. A chill ran down my spine. I realized this trespasser was another victim, someone who got too close. Perhaps someone Nolan hadn't snared himself. Perhaps another broken soul. I scanned the tack room for a phone, found one wedged on a shelf, and snapped pictures. Then I reached for the radio again and was about to call when the barn lights flickered on. Two bare bulbs hanging from the center beam, winking as the power surged. The figure on the blanket groaned. Footsteps thundered above me. Heavy, deliberate. I grabbed my weapon and pressed back against the door. The footsteps came down the ladder from the hayloft, each step echoing through the barn. My heart thrashed as the shadow on the floor grew larger. I called out, voice steady despite the fear winding in my chest. "Come out with your hands up." The footsteps stopped overhead, a soft click, like a lock being undone. Then a voice, low, familiar. "Deputy Hale," it said, the accent different from Nolan's, but the tone eerily reminiscent. "I've been waiting." My blood ran cold. I scanned the room, haystacks packed against the walls, pitchforks leaning forgotten in the corner, no obvious place someone could be hiding. I edged toward the ladder. "Who's there?" I demanded, sweat beading under my collar. The groaning figure stirred, and I realized with a jolt that it wasn't Trespasser. It was another officer from Dispatch Deputy Singh, missing since last week. His face was ashen, eyes half-lidded. A floorboard creaked to my right. I doubled back toward the tack room door. From the shadows, a figure emerged, taller than Nolan, broader. Face obscured by the beam of my flashlight, but the posture, the deliberate swagger. It reminded me of my partner's betrayal. "Who are you?" I barked, cocking my weapon. The figure stepped into the beam. The face was new to me. Thin lips set in a cruel smile, eyes gleaming with anticipation. He wore a sheriff's jacket, but the badge was flipped upside down. In his hand was a video camera, lens trained on me. "This is for my file, deputy," he said, voice smooth. "I hear you like documenting things." My breath caught. The irony slammed me like a physical blow. Every instinct screamed to shoot, to run, to call backup. But I forced myself to hold the beam steady. "You don't know what you're doing," I said quietly. "This ends now." He laughed, soft at first, then harder, echoing off the barn walls. "You think this is about me, or Nolan, or Singh? It was never about one killer." Cold dread pooled in my gut. He raised the camera. "This is a movement," he said. "A crusade against the complacent, the trusted, the system that lets people slip through the cracks." My mind raced. A movement. Others like him, targeting deputies, civilians, anyone they deemed forgotten. The missing men, the trespasser, Singh, they were pawns in a twisted showcase of oversight. I pressed the radio button. My thumb hovered, then recoiled. No signal. Inside this metal barn, the radio went dead. He must have jammed it. He stepped closer, camera lens inches from my face. "Smile, Deputy Hale. You're my next case study." My hand shook on the weapon. Outside, storm clouds were gathering, wind rattling the barn's boards. Snow began to drift in through the gaps. I knew then I had seconds to act. I drew the beam upward and fired, 2 quick shots at the light bulbs. Darkness swallowed us both, a void so complete I felt naked. He cursed and dropped the camera. I heard it shatter on the floor. I fumbled for my radio. Static hissed, then life. "Hale? Hale? Respond." "Dispatch, it's Hale. Shots fired. I need units now." Footsteps thundered in the snow outside. Rogers, backed by officers, weapons drawn, floodlights training into the barn. My beam lanced through the darkness, illuminating the stranger pinned against a haystack, hands raised. Singh sat up on the blanket, wounded but conscious. Rogers rushed in, cuffs in hand. "You okay?" he shouted. I nodded, voice tight. He called it a movement. Outside, I saw the line of cruisers, their lights off but engines idling. Behind them, the horizon flared with distant lightning, a new storm roaring in. I holstered my weapon and dropped to Singh's side, checking his pulse. He managed a weak smile. "Thanks," he whispered. I radioed for medics and walked to the barn door, stepping out into the swirling snow. The night had grown darker, the wind louder, as though celebrating another chapter of terror. I looked out at the field, at the farmhouse where I'd first faced Nolan's rage, at the barns and roads now scarred by this new threat. As the first backup cruisers rolled up, red and blue lights flashing, I realized the fight was far from over. The storm wasn't just outside. It lived in every cracked hallway, every deserted road, every silent alarm. And when the wind howled through the barn's shattered windows, I understood that the darkness wasn't ready to release me. Not yet. I raised my head to the sky, snow pelting my face. Somewhere out there the next hunter waited, studying my patterns, mapping my routines, ready to turn my life into their next case file. I sat on the tailgate of my cruiser long after the medics had loaded Deputy Singh into the ambulance. My gloves were damp with melting snow, and each breath felt like inhaling shards of glass. I watched the lights of the farmhouse blink through the storm, now abandoned, a skeleton of broken boards and blown-out windows. Rogers stood beside me, arms crossed, his breath fogging in the air. "They found his camera," Rogers said quietly. "He'd hacked the alarm system here, jammed your radio, streamed to a private feed." He shook his head. "It was a setup from the start." I nodded, unable to speak. The wind gusted, rattling my cruiser's doors. Somewhere in the darkness, a lone barn owl cried, and I imagined Nolan's voice answering it. My mind went back to that narrow hallway, to the Polaroids on the wall, to the crackle of recordings meant to shame me. I'd thought I'd faced the worst. I'd been wrong. Rogers crouched and pointed at the ground. Footprints lead west, into the woods, but they fade after 50 yards. He tossed me a pair of bright evidence flags. "We'll grid search in the morning, but tonight he's gone." I felt a hollow ache. The storm had swallowed the trespasser, but how many were out there? He'd called it a movement. I pictured rows of cameras hidden in barns and back roads across the county, streaming our lives to some underground audience feeding on our fear. I'd been awakened once by Nolan's betrayal. Now I'd woken up to a conspiracy. Rogers nudged me. "You should get in. Heat's on in the ambulance bay. You're freezing." I slid off the tailgate, brushing snow from my trousers. The cold bit into my bones with renewed hunger. "Thanks." My voice came out rough. I turned back to the farmhouse one last time. The porch light was gone and the windows stared out like empty eye sockets. In that darkness, I felt its gaze, as if the house itself knew I was leaving. Inside the ambulance bay, the medic checked Singh's vitals while I stripped off my soaked gloves and jacket. My uniform hung heavy, doused by sleet and blood from the ear wound. The medic handed me a warm blanket. "You did good tonight," he said. "He won't hurt Singh again." I wrapped the blanket around my shoulders and closed my eyes. "Thanks," I murmured. But words felt hollow. Back at the station, I'd have to file the detailed report, attend debrief, answer questions about the failure of backup, the stretch of unchecked time when this man, this movement, slipped through the cracks. When I emerged into the garage aisle, the storm had intensified. Flakes hammered the windshield as I climbed into the cruiser and turned the key. The heater sputtered to life. I let the warmth chase out the cold, but it could not chase out the fear. I drove the final 2 miles to my house on Ridge Lane, headlights illuminating snow-laden oaks that arched overhead. My wife's car was in the driveway, its passenger door open. My heart lurched, and I slammed the brake, the cruiser fishtailing on ice. I leaped out, hand on my weapon, and sprinted to the porch. Inside, the foyer was dark. The tumble of boots and jacket on the floor told me she'd come halfway down the hall before pausing. I switched on the entry light, revealing muddy footprints leading to the living room. My pulse spiked. Footprints oversized, boots I didn't recognize. The storm had tracked them in, but the prints were too clear, too deliberate. I drew my weapon and edged into the living room. The hearthstone was cold, embers long extinguished. Scattered on the coffee table were 3 Polaroid photos. One of me hugging my daughter at the school gate, one of my wife waving goodbye at the front door this morning, and one of my partner Rogers, standing in this very room last winter. Under each, messages in neat red script. Target, observed, next. My breath caught. The room felt tighter, walls inching inward. Every picture was new, dated today's date, stamped at 5:47 p.m., hours ago, before I even got the call from dispatch. The hallway clock read 3:12 a.m. I sank to my knees, sweat and snow melting on my skin. Footsteps in the hallway, slow, deliberate. I blinked, half expecting Rogers to step through the archway, but it wasn't him. A slender figure emerged, gloved hands, dark jacket, hood pulled low. They carried a small, battered suitcase. My daughter's favorite doll, missing since her last school play, lay half hidden in the crook of the suitcase handle. I raised my weapon. "Stop!" My voice cracked like a whip. The figure paused, suitcase dropping to the floor with a thud. They raised their hands, palms outward. In the flicker of the overhead light, I saw the face obscured by shadows. A slow, deliberate shake of the head. "You should have listened," the voice said, soft, mocking. "All those calls, Deputy Hale, the ones you didn't return." My chest tightened. My family tangled in this web as bait, as proof of my failure. Rage and fear warred inside me. I took a step forward, weapon shaking. The stranger lifted the suitcase handle, tilting it toward me. The doll's glassy eyes caught the light, reflecting it back with a cold smile. I could hear my daughter's laughter echo in my mind, then silence. Outside, the wind howled beneath the eaves like a chorus of warnings. I tightened my grip on the weapon, finger on the trigger. "Tell me," the figure whispered, voice low and smooth, "who's next?" The words fell, final and terrible, into the charged air between us. I flinched, my world shrinking to that suitcase and the hollow stare of the doll. And I realized with a slow, sinking certainty that the movement was inside every quiet hallway, every empty room, every unanswered call. My radio crackled on the kitchen counter, untouched, dispatch's voice lost in static. I took a single, shuddering breath and raised my weapon. Outside, the storm raged on, and inside, the silhouette did not move. The storm answered only with thunder. I pulled onto the Shoulder Creek back road just after midnight, my headlights cutting through a low blanket of fog that hugged the pavement. The thermometer on my dashboard read 12 degrees Fahrenheit, but the wind whipping through the pines made it feel like a frozen blade against my face. I'm Deputy Marcus Hayes, and I've been out here long enough to know that stillness at this hour often means trouble is waiting just beyond what you can see. Tonight, I was following up on a silent alarm at the Old Ridge feed silo, a rusted skeleton of corrugated metal sitting 2 miles south of Lonesome Ridge. Nobody lives out here anymore, except maybe the night creatures, and someone desperate enough to break in. I killed the engine and stepped onto loose gravel. The crunch beneath my boots echoed in the emptiness, louder than my own heartbeat. My breath came in quick white bursts, and I caught myself glancing back at the cruiser, as if I expected it to vanish behind me. The wind rattled the pines overhead, and I unshouldered my flashlight, hand resting on my sidearm. I flicked it on, bright enough to turn the fog into dust in the beam, and called in over the radio. "Dispatch, this is 2 Charlie. I'm on scene at the Ridge Silo. No sign of forced entry yet." "Copy?" Static rasped back, and I repeated the call before I got a reply. "Copy, 2 Charlie. Proceed with caution." The voice sounded distant, like it came through water. I made my way around the perimeter of the silo, checking the main service hatch. Its latch unbroken, paint flaking off in chips. The wind shifted, bringing a scent of damp earth and something coppery, like old pennies left in a puddle. My flashlight beam caught a scuffed handprint on the hatch, smeared in dust, half the size of my glove. I froze. No one stood here but me. I radioed in. "I've got a handprint, fresh, on the hatch. Could be a caretaker alarm malfunction, but..." My voice trailed off as the hatch rattled from the inside. Slow, deliberate. I drew my weapon, finger resting on the trigger guard, and crouched to peer through the small inspection window. Blackness. No shape, no motion, just the void beyond glass. The hatch snapped open, and a rush of cold air spilled out, carrying with it the sound of a low, mechanical buzz, an alarm resetting itself somewhere deep inside. I hollered, "Hands where I can see 'em!" But the only answer was echo. I slipped inside, boots thudding on metal grating. My flashlight beam bobbed over broken feed chutes, rust stains, and hanging cables. Every breath sounded too loud in my own ears. Up ahead, there was a narrow ladder bolted to a support beam, leading up to a catwalk high above. I paused, radio in one hand, weapon in the other, and thought about waiting for backup. Then I heard the scrape of metal. Footsteps sliding along the beam above me. "Dispatch," I whispered. "I've got movement on the catwalk, no visual yet. Renewing request for backup." Static swallowed my words. I wiped snow off my radio mic, but all I got was a ghost of static. I swallowed hard and began the climb. Each rung rattled beneath my gloved hands. At the top, my light swung over open air 30 feet below and a narrow walkway that ended against the silo wall. No ladder, no door, nothing but sheet metal. My heart jumped when I saw footprints in the dusty catwalk, barely there, but distinct. They led out of the hatch I had just used, toward a sealed panel I'd skipped over. Footprints too small, too light to be mine. I knelt to inspect them, sweat mixing with the cold against my neck, when my radio burst to life. "You 2 Charlie." The voice was tinny, panicked. I narrowed my eyes. It wasn't dispatch. It sounded like a whisper behind me. I spun, but there was nothing but darkness. The fog had seeped in through the unseen gaps. I clicked off my weapon's safety and tapped the panel's edges. It gave slightly under my glove. I pressed, and it swung open into a pitch-black cavity. A sudden snap came from below. I aimed my flashlight down and saw a shadow move across the hatch opening. Quick, deliberate. My pulse hammered. I jabbed at the radio. "Backup, now!" The reply crackled in and out. "Hold position, unit en route. 2 minutes, maybe." 2 minutes felt like an hour in here. I forced myself forward into the darkness beyond the panel. The beam traveled along bent pipes and dripping moisture. I smelled earth, damp and ancient. The metal ladder under my feet went down into nothing but pitch. I heard a faint thump, like a heart beating somewhere in the dark. I reached the bottom, and my boots hit muddy ground. The light flickered. My fingers tightened around the flashlight handle, knuckles white. I called out, voice trembling. "Sheriff's deputy. I'm here to help. Show yourself." No answer, only the echo of my own breathing. I took one step forward, then another. The ground sloped down to a tunnel carved into earth, rough and narrow. My flashlight caught scratches on the clay walls, marks that looked like they'd been made by fingernails. The thumping grew louder, uneven, as if something big was stumbling in the dark. I swallowed the lump in my throat and pressed on. The tunnel opened into a larger chamber where water pooled at my boots. My beam swept across slick stone and a crude wooden beam supporting the ceiling. A single cord crept along the wall, trailing upward to a bare bulb overhead. I flipped the switch. The light burned bright for a heartbeat, then dimmed to a weak glow, just enough to see a triangular formation on the wet floor. A flashlight I didn't recognize, a badge, and a blood-smudged radio. My blood ran cold. The badge was not mine. The radio's channel was set to my frequency. I reached for it first, lifted it from the ground. Static hissed to life in my ear, and a voice, distant but familiar. Not alone here. Then silence. The bulb fluttered, and everything went dark. My heart slamming against my ribs, I backed toward the tunnel entrance. My boots stuck in mud as the ground trembled. I switched my light back on, again, only a faint glow. The thumping swelled behind me, closer now, pounding like a fist on a door. I stumbled backward, slipped on the wet stone and dropped the radio. It skittered away into the darkness, antenna snapping. As I hit my feet, the tunnel behind me collapsed with a slam of earth and rock. I ran back toward the hatch, hands aching, lungs burning, leaving mud and panic in my wake. I burst into the feed bin, light swinging wildly, and saw the panel slam shut behind me. The silence hit like a freight train. My radio squawked back to life with dispatch. "To Charlie, backup is 5 minutes out. What's your status?" I swallowed hard. "Dispatch, get everyone you can down here. I need—" My words cut off when I saw footprints in the dust. Mine, leading from the panel up to the catwalk, then turning back toward the hatch again, as though someone had been watching me the entire time. And the handprint on the hatch wasn't alone anymore. There were two now, side by side, pressed deep into the metal. I swallowed the lump in my throat, teeth chattering, and lifted my flashlight. The beam landed on the hatch lens, and I swear I saw movement. A flash of something standing just beyond the glass. I raised my weapon, whispered, "Show yourself," and the world held its breath. Then a fist hit the glass. From the other side, rattling it so hard the entire silo shook. My radio crackled again, but this time I didn't answer. I just waited, every muscle tensed, for whoever or whatever was out there to break in. The glass shivered under that first blow, then cracked in a spiderweb pattern, and I felt the vibration through my boots. My flashlight slipped in my grip, beam swinging wildly, painting the silo walls in sickly stabs of light and shadow. I braced one boot against the hatch frame and pressed my shoulder to the door, every muscle locked like a loaded rifle. The metal groaned as if something massive was forcing its way in, and a wrenching odor, like scorched wiring and hot iron, poured through the fracture. I squeezed my eyes shut for a moment, trying to steady my breathing, but when I opened them, the world tilted. A shape loomed in the fractured glow, pale and glistening, as though standing just outside the world I knew. My heart thundered so loudly, I was sure whoever was outside heard it. I hauled my weapon up, finger on the trigger, voice raw when I managed to croak, "This is law enforcement, step back now." The metal buckled again, a jagged strip folding inward, and the shape recoiled for a heartbeat, only to slam against the door with enough force to jolt my teeth. Shards of glass rained down, tinkling on the metal floor like broken teeth. I ducked, smashed my radio mic to call for immediate evac, then felt that same coppery scent, thicker now, almost cloying, coating the back of my throat. Sirens finally pierced the night, distant but growing louder. I leaned back against the shuddering hatch, itching to flee, but pinned by adrenaline and dread. The thing outside didn't press its advantage. Instead, it backed away, silence flooding the space in its wake. I didn't wait to see if it returned. I kicked the hatch open, stumbling into the night air and crashing onto the gravel. Behind me, the silo doors swung shut of their own weight, sealing in the darkness. I didn't look back as I ran to my cruiser, pounding my arms to shake off the chill. When the backup cruisers screeched in, I was already there, radio clenched in one hand, boots scraping the frosty ground. But inside the bin, when they pried the hatch open again, they found nothing. No footprints leading away, no sign of forced entry, just the echo of my screams. I never returned to the ridge silo after that night. The official report blamed stress and hypothermia. They said my story wasn't corroborated by evidence. But I know what I heard echoing against those metal walls, what breathed through that cracked glass, and what vanished into the night when the sirens came. I still hear it sometimes, out there on quiet roads when the world falls silent, like something is waiting to slip inside the light and swallow you whole. I sat in the cruiser for a long minute after they pried open that hatch again, watching the silo's silhouette against fog-shrouded trees. The gravel under my boots still crackled in my skull, louder than any warning light or siren. The new shift had piled in behind me. Corporal Jensen and Deputy Morales, flashlights dancing over the jagged metal door. They spilled into the bin, weapons drawn, voices low but urgent. I followed, staying close enough to feel their tension rattling against my spine. Inside, everything looked as if I'd never been there. No handprint by the hatch, no scattered glass, no sign of that thing smashing against the door. The fresh footprints were gone. The triangle of items vanished. The air smelled cold and empty, without that copper sting. Jensen shook his head, breath fogging in the weak light. "Deputy Hayes, you sure this was here? You saw it?" His voice was gentle, like he was coaxing a story from a frightened witness. I swallowed, squeezed my flashlight until the beam wavered. I saw it. Something, or someone, beat against that door, left a print, heard it breathing. My throat felt raw, like I'd been shouting into the wind. Morales shone her light around, expression tight. "We found nothing except these broken panels," she said, raising a shard of metal the size of her hand. The jagged edge glinted. "Looks old, no fresh damage." I rubbed my forehead, fingers tangling in sweat and rough wool. Everything in me screamed to run, to leave the silo and never come back. But I couldn't, not yet. "I need to know what's down there," I muttered, voice low. "If there's a tunnel or another hatch or—" I didn't finish. I knew how it sounded, like I'd cracked, chasing shadows. Jensen studied me for a long moment, then nodded. "All right, we check every inch." The three of us fanned out. Morales stayed by the hatch. Jensen and I combed the walls, sliding hands along corrugated metal, tapping for hollows. My heart thudded every time metal rang hollow. Beneath one panel, a bolt hole betrayed a seam in the plating. Jensen pried it free with his pocket knife. A narrow gap yawned. "You sure about this?" he asked. I flicked off the safety on my sidearm. "Yeah." We pressed against the seam. It swung open on stiff hinges. Behind it, blackness, like a shuttered window. The smell hit us first, putrid earth and damp stone, metallic and deep, like a grave just opened. I drew a breath and steeled myself. Descending the ladder again, I felt every eye on me. Jensen's lamplight bobbing overhead, Morales's steady hush below. I reached the bottom and swallowed hard. Water pooled around our boots, ankle deep, swirling as we stepped. My flashlight carved a path into the dark. The walls were clay, reddish-brown, with crude notches that looked ancient. Rusted rebar jutted at odd angles, supporting a timber beam so warped it looked alive. I flicked on the overhead bulb. It burned bright for a second, then sputtered into a faint glow. Shadows danced along the walls. A low hum began, barely audible at first, then rising in pitch like wind through a whistle. It pressed against my eardrums, a steady drone that vibrated through my bones. Jensen looked at me, eyes wide. "Where's Morales?" The sound of dripping water answered. Then a soft scraping. I swept my beam toward the tunnel entrance we'd come through. Morales wasn't there. Panic twisted in my chest. "She went back up," I said, voice tight. But the rebar ladder was empty. My flashlight flicked up the shaft. No sign of her harness or boots, just black. The hum swelled. The ground vibrated. I called her name. Morales. My voice echoed like I'd shouted in a canyon. No reply, only that humming. Jensen clicked on his tactical light, sweeping the chamber. The beam found a fresh set of footprints leading away, bare, wide, the toes splayed. Too big for Morales or me. They trailed down the tunnel into deeper darkness. "Damn it," Jensen muttered. He raised his radio. "Dispatch, we've got a missing deputy. Search party in silo basement. Send medics. More units." Static crackled, then a faint voice. "Copy 2, Charlie. Send coordinates." I swallowed bile. Coordinates sent. I clicked off the radio. The hum rose to a shriek that made my teeth rattle. I thought I heard whispers beneath it, sibilant voices that I couldn't place. Spanish? English? Something else, as if several tongues spoke backwards at once. I looked at Jensen. He was pale beneath his cap. "We locate her fast," he said, voice unsteady. I nodded, my mind racing. But my legs felt heavy. The muddy water sloshed around our shins as we moved. The tunnel narrowed, only wide enough for one at a time. Jensen went first, light swinging. I followed, weapon ready. Behind me, the hatch sealed itself with a metallic clack. I flinched, spun. No hatch, no ladder, no exit. Heart hammering. I pounded on the wall. "Jensen! Morales!" I screamed, breath catching. The humming stopped. Silence slammed into my skull, then footsteps, soft, deliberate, coming from deeper in the tunnel. My flashlight beam trembled across slick walls. The footsteps stopped. The silence stretched so long I thought my ears would bleed. Then something touched my shoulder, light as a feather, cold as death. I spun, weapon raised, only to see empty air. The beam caught a smear on the tunnel wall, Morales's flashlight beam, smeared across the clay. I wiped the muzzle of my gun on my sleeve and pressed closer to the wall, tracing the smear. My fingers came away sticky. Blood. Jensen's voice crackled through the gloom. "Hayes, you there?" He sounded shaken. "We found the chamber. You need to see—" His words cut off with a pop. My radio went dead. I slammed it with the butt of my hand. Nothing. The hum started again, low and insistent, and a pair of lights appeared ahead, small, flickering, like distant lanterns moving closer. I swallowed. Jensen's light beam bobbed in the distance, alone. I raced forward, boots slipping in mud, calling his name. The tunnel opened into a vast cavern, walls lined with dripping stalactites. In the center, water pooled in a natural basin. The flickering lights revealed themselves to be 2 lanterns, swinging from unseen hooks on the rock ceiling. Jensen lay on the ground near the basin's edge, face down, breathing shallow. I rushed to his side, knelt in the water. He jerked awake, eyes glassy. "They're here," he gasped. The lights flared, casting giant shadows that pulsed on the walls. Shadows not anchored to anything. My flashlight picked out shapes sliding between beams, long, spindly limbs, and bodies bent at impossible angles. Jensen tried to sit up. I grabbed his arm. "Easy, what happened?" His eyes darted around. They showed me the shapes, then my radio. It whispered things, my name, Marcus, come here. His voice trailed off. The cavern quaked. Water rippled. I saw reflections in the basin, not just ours, but dozens of dark forms gathering around us in the water's edge. They stood just beyond reach, pale eyes glinting. I fired a warning shot into the ceiling. Rock dust fluttered down. The shapes recoiled, then surged forward in a silent wave. Jensen and I scrambled backward. The water sloshed over my boots. I grabbed his hand. "Back to the hatch!" I roared, dragging him. The cavern trembled. Lanterns snapped off, plunging us into near darkness. My flashlight stuttered, on, off, on, illuminating the exit just ahead. We plunged into the tunnel, stumbling over mud and roots. I heard something chase us. A low, rasping breath that matched my own terror. I felt hot breath on my neck, like someone breathing just behind me. I didn't look back, I just ran, fumbling for the hatch ladder. I climbed out 3 rungs at a time, hoisted Jensen after me. We burst into the silo bin, gasping, hearts thundering. The hatch swung shut behind us with a metallic sigh. Silence fell. I leaned against it, pressing my ear to the cold metal, waiting. Nothing. Jensen sat on the floor, head in his hands. I called into the darkness outside, "Morales, dispatch, anyone!" Only wind answered. I helped Jensen to his feet. We climbed out the service hatch into the bitter night air. The fog had lifted. Moonlight cut through the trees, pale and indifferent. Our cruisers sat with doors open, lights still spinning. Officers flooded around, flashlights sweeping the silo's exterior. Morales burst through the trees, rifle raised, voice shaking. "I thought I heard you call." She stopped when she saw us. Thank God. I steadied Jensen against the cruiser, checking him for wounds. He shook his head, no cuts, just terror. I looked back at the silo, silent, empty, impossible. The official report later called it a cave-in or gas pocket. They said my story was stress-induced, that I'd misread shadows. But they never explained the print on the hatch. Double that time, deeper, and the voices on the radio calling my name in a whisper. We never went back. The entrance was welded shut, the silo condemned. But sometimes I drive by when I'm on another call, night thick around me, and I swear I see a pale glow behind the corroded doors. I slow down, fingers tightening on the wheel. My radio hisses to life, then dies, static, and a faint voice saying, "Marcus." I grip the wheel so hard my knuckles turn white, and I know it's not over. I climbed back into my cruiser before dawn's first gray light had a chance to bleed into the sky. My hands were still trembling, blood and mud crusted under my nails, but I forced myself to focus. Jensen sat in the passenger seat, eyes fixed on the dash, breathing shallow and uneven. Morales climbed into the back, her rifle barrel still dripping from the tunnel's muck. We didn't speak. No one knew what to say. The drive back to Archville Station was silent, except for the engine's hum and our ragged breathing. Every stretch of road looked the same. Dark pines, empty fields, the occasional farmhouse with curtains drawn tight. I kept glancing in the rearview mirror, half expecting to see something standing in the back seat where Morales had been. But there was only darkness. When we pulled into the lot, our lights painted the brick facade of the station in harsh relief. Inside, the fluorescent bulbs felt like they were burning right through me. Dispatchers glanced up, surprise flickering in their eyes when they saw us. I cut the engine and climbed out, leaving Jensen slumped over the wheel, and Morales slowly crawling from the back. The deputy at the front desk looked at our uniforms, then at the mud and blood spatter on our coats. "What the hell happened out there?" he asked, voice low and tense. "No easy way to explain," I said, my voice flat, distant. "Gather the shift. I want a full briefing in 20 minutes. He nodded, pale. Jensen and Morales followed me down the hallway to the briefing room, boots echoing against the linoleum floor. I shut the door, turned on the projector out of habit. One more piece of routine in a night that had shredded every one of them. The overhead projector whirred, greenish light pooling on the wall. I clicked my pen against my palm, fighting to steady my voice. "We went back to the Ridge silo after I reported the break-in," I began. "I saw prints on the hatch. We found a seam in the plating and followed it down into a tunnel. Morales went up. She's safe, but shaken. Jensen and I went deeper." I paused, scanning their faces. Detectives Bram and Lucy, patrol sergeants Carver and Mills, and a handful of patrol officers who'd volunteered for the search. Their eyes were wide, bodies leaning forward, as if I could project the images through my words. In the cavern, we found lanterns hanging from unseen hooks. Jensen and I saw something, shapes moving between the shadows. Then the ground trembled, and a wave of forms rose from the pool at our feet. We ran. The hatch sealed behind us. We climbed out. Morales got separated for a moment. She heard her name on the radio, went back to answer, then nearly dropped her rifle into a chasm we didn't even see. My voice cracked. "We're lucky to be alive." Carver rubbed his chin. "But what are these shapes? Ghosts? Animals? Some kind of cave creatures?" He looked from me to Jensen and back. "We need evidence." Mills swallowed. "We did a perimeter sweep. There's no cave entrance outside. The hatch is sealed. Satellite images don't show a collapse. Geologic surveys say there's no limestone to carve out a cavern like that." I leaned against the table, shoulders heavy. "I've been back to the site," I said quietly. "Sometimes at night, when I drive by on other calls, I swear I see lights behind the metal walls, and my radio, static, then someone whispering my name. I'm not sure what I saw in that cavern, but it wasn't human. Something moves there, and it calls us." Lucy swallowed. "You want us to mount another expedition?" I shook my head. We seal it. We pretend it never existed. We log it as a dangerous structural hazard." I looked at each of them in turn. "Because if what's down there ever comes out, it's going to be far worse than flash floods or collapsed beams. We bury it, literally." I tapped the map tacked to the wall, the silo circled in red marker. "We pour concrete into every hatch, weld the doors shut. We restrict access. We install cameras facing away. We act like nothing happened out there except a routine alarm malfunction." Detective Bram spoke up. "We still have Morales' rifle there, and Jensen's radio, and that other flashlight. We need to collect the items." "No," I cut in. "Leave them. Whatever took them will reclaim them eventually. If we remove them, it will only draw whatever it is back. Leave the cave sealed, leave the silo condemned, and leave it alone." Silence filled the room. I let it hang, then clicked off the projector. The green glow died, and half-shadows pooled in the corners. "Report it as an electrical fault, an unstable foundation danger, whatever. But no more trips. Understood?" Heads nodded slowly. The room emptied as officers muttered among themselves, heavy with dread. I lingered in the doorway, eyes on the map, heart pounding. I could almost feel the cavern breathing beneath the earth, the rhythmic pulse echoing through the ground. I didn't sleep that day. Instead, I drove back out after my shift ended, before the rumors could replace the truth. The silo sat under a sunburnt sky, metal body rust red, spires of pipe jutting against the pale blue. I parked 10 yards off, behind a stand of pines, and kept the engine running. My bloodhound, Duke, sat beside me in the seat, nose twitching at scents I couldn't name. I wanted confirmation that the hatch was still sealed, that no one had heard what we heard. I slipped out, boots softening in pine needles, and approached the silo. No lights, no movement. The caretaker's shack was boarded up, windows crossed in rough planks. I circled the perimeter, keen for any sign. Footprints, smudges, metal dust from welding. Nothing. Gravel lay untouched. The door was welded shut, seams cooled to dull gray. I ran my hand over cold metal. No handprints, no fresh marks. I backed away, heart slowing, and noticed the radio antenna on the roof. It leaned as if bent by wind or weight. I felt a tug of dread, eyes drawn upward, and then I saw it. A single cable, snaking from the antenna down the silo wall, vanishing beneath a welded seam. My brow furrowed. The cable was new, shiny, not corroded. Why install cable on a condemned silo? I crouched, flashlight in hand, and traced the cable. It disappeared between two welded plates into a narrow slit. I pressed my ear to the seam. Faint sound, almost like humming. Rhythmical, deliberate, like breathing slowed to half speed. I snapped back, heart pounding, instinct screaming to run. But curiosity, stupid, dangerous curiosity, held me there. I felt Duke whine behind me. I looked back. He sat on his haunches, ears perked. Muzzle turned toward the tunnel hatch set flush into the ground 50 feet away, half hidden under brush. I hadn't seen it before. The locked hatch we'd used for the drill training months ago was buried now, forgotten. I stood, adrenaline spiking, and approached. The hatch cover was cold, heavy steel, painted with warning stencils. Hazardous structure. Keep out. My breath tightened. Duke barked once. I knelt, wiped mud from the cover, and saw scratches around the edges. Fresh. Something had tried to claw its way up. I reached for my radio. Dispatch to Charlie. Request immediate assistance at Ridge Silo. Hazard. Extreme hazard. Static cut me off. No response. I looked up. The side of the silo above me seemed to shift, as if the metal skin rippled. The cable I'd seen quivered. I heard a voice, a whisper, right in my ear. Marcus, so soft I thought I imagined it. Duke snarled, hackles raised, nose sniffing the air. Then the ground rumbled. A low vibration reverberated through my boots, up my spine. My flashlight flickered and died. The world went dark, and Duke's barking echoed into the black. I fumbled for batteries, heart slamming, mind racing. When the light returned, I saw the seam below the cable split open like a mouth, edges peeling back, revealing blackness behind. I staggered back, instincts screaming. Duke growled, backing toward me. The wind kicked up, swirling needles into the air. From the darkness beyond the hatch, something exhaled, a gust of hot, fetid air that smelled of iron and rot. Duke yelped and lunged forward, teeth bared, but the hatch yawned wider. A shape emerged, one figure, then another, slender, pale silhouettes with two long limbs and heads cocked as if listening. I stumbled, tripped, and crashed onto the gravel, radio skittering away. I scrambled back, pulling out my weapon. The silhouettes advanced, stepping into the moonlight. Their eyes were black pits, reflecting my torch's beam. They paused at the hatch edge, toes curling over steel, like hunters testing the air. I fired once, just a warning shot into the ground. The flash lit up the clearing, and for a terrible heartbeat the shapes froze. Then they tilted their heads in unison and stepped onto the gravel, moving with jerky precision. Duke lunged, growling. They cocked their heads, watched him, and then one reached out, an arm too long, fingers spindly, and touched his muzzle. He yelped, whipped around, and fled, disappearing into the pines. I scrambled to my feet, chest heaving. The silhouettes advanced one slow step at a time. The concrete poured long ago lay cracked beneath their feet. Metal ladders melted into the seam. The wind flattened my hair, and I felt it then, beneath my boots, through the soles, a vibration, a pulse, like a heartbeat coming from deep underground. I raised the weapon. "Get back! Get back!" my voice echoed. But they didn't move. They just watched me, heads tilted, eyes unblinking. My bullet casing spat onto the gravel as I emptied my clip, each shot dull and futile. The shapes absorbed the noise, unfazed, and tilted their heads wider, like curious beasts. I swallowed bile, eyes stinging. I didn't have another round. I turned and ran, past the caretaker's shack, past the trees where Duke vanished, toward my cruiser. My legs burned, lungs on fire. Gravel blew behind me. I reached the driver's door, yanked it open, and dove inside. I slammed it shut, locked it, and shoved the key into the ignition. Sirens wailed in the distance. Backup finally coming. I peeled away down the gravel drive, headlights carving arcs through the night. In my rearview mirror, I saw them. 3 silhouettes standing at the silo hatch, watching me go. Their heads tilted, shadows stretching long and thin across the ground. I kept driving until the trees thinned and the lights of Archville came into view. I radioed in, voice hollow. "Dispatch, code red, silo, compromised, mortars and fire teams, request immediate orders." Static answered me. Then the whisper. "Marcus, don't leave." I slammed the radio off. The road stretched ahead, dark and empty, and I realized there was nowhere left to run. The shapes were loose now, slipping beyond the hatch, beyond the boundaries we'd tried to impose. They were out, and they were waiting, and every lonely back road, every silent farm lane, every condemned silo might be the next place they emerged. I drove on, but I knew the truth. You can't bury something that's already crawling free. The night was theirs now, and they knew my name. I didn't sleep that night. I sat in the driver's seat of my cruiser in the station parking lot, engine idling, lights off, staring straight ahead at the dark silhouette of the precinct building. Jensen was inside filing his report. Morales was at home, shaken, while I waited for orders that I knew would never come. My radio lay dead beside me. The plastic case cracked where I'd slammed it against the dash. I rubbed my temples and tried to make sense of what had happened. 3 sets of eyes, not human, standing in the gravel outside the silo. My name on their lips. Even now, I could hear them whisper it. At 3:17 a.m., the phone on the console buzzed. I picked it up with a hand that trembled so badly I had to clamp my other hand over it. "Deputy Hayes," I said. The voice at the other end was cold and clipped. "Captain Ward, my commanding officer. Report to briefing room in 30 minutes. Bring logs, statements, everything you've got, and Deputy Morales will join you." "Sir," I said, swallowing. "You want my full statement?" "Just get here," he said, then hung up without another word. The line clicked dead. I exhaled, shoved the phone back down, and killed the engine. I sat there for a long moment, waiting for the sun to rise, waiting for dawn to chase away monsters. But dawn felt farther away than ever. The briefing room's fluorescent lights buzzed like an insect nest. Captain Ward stood at the head of the table, arms crossed. Advertisements for promotional exams and community outreach posters littered the walls, but they meant nothing in that moment. Morales sat to my right, pale but composed, pen hovering over her notebook. Jensen sat to my left, still rubbing the back of his neck as if he had sleep where the silo's echoes should have been. Ward didn't bother with small talk. He unfolded a stack of paper and laid it on the table. "Hayes, Morales, Jensen," he began. "We reviewed your reports. The silo, the tunnel, the cavern, none of it lines up with any geological surveys. No blueprints indicate underground work, no permits for construction. Satellite imagery shows no change in terrain. The silo was condemned years ago." He stared at me. "Hypothermia-induced hallucinations. Tunnel collapse nightmares. You heard voices from static. You claimed shapes moved in the dark. Yet no physical evidence, no handprints, no footprints, no structural breach. So here's the plan. We close the file. The silo is condemned for structural reasons alone. You three will report it as such. Complete your statements accordingly. No mention of shapes, voices, or missing deputies. Understood?" Morales picked up her pen. "Sir, we found Jensen's radio and the other flashlight in the bin. Their evidence—" "Station maintenance lost those items months ago," Ward interrupted. "We moved on. This is a matter of protocol and liability. We can't admit to paranormal, to unknown entities. It'll ruin the department's credibility." I felt rage, disgust, and fear coiling together. My voice sounded hollow when I spoke. "Sir, we have sworn testimony from 3 deputies. We have markings on metal. We saw them. They followed me into town. Captain, they're out there." Ward's eyes narrowed. He leaned forward. "Hayes, if you persist with this line, you'll be subject to mental health evaluation. Your badge will be suspended pending review. Choose your words carefully." My jaw clenched. I looked at Jensen and Morales, 2 brothers and a sister in this mess, and realized we were alone. We were on our own. Ward tapped the stack of papers. "Fill these out. Follow orders. Dismissed." I got back into my cruiser, this time shutting the door so hard the glass rattled. I didn't respond to Morales' text asking if I was all right. I didn't look at Jensen, who gave me a tense nod as I backed out. I drove across town and parked in front of my cottage on Elm Street, an old clapboard house shaded by oaks, 5 blocks from the precinct. Inside, everything was quiet. Lamps off, curtains drawn. I flipped the porch light on with a click, boots echoing in the empty hallway, and let the door swing shut behind me. I stripped off my coat and uniform, hung them in the closet, and stared at my reflection in the bathroom mirror. My face was gray, eyes sunken, pupils wide. No uniforms hid it now. I was just a man who'd seen something he couldn't unsee. I splashed cold water on my face, the mirror fogging around me, and tried to calm my breath. Duke, my German shepherd, padded up behind me, tail wagging slowly. I needed his ears. "It's okay, boy," I whispered. "I'm home." Sleep didn't come. I lay in bed, Duke at my feet, morning crowing somewhere outside. I stared at the ceiling, at the beam splitting it, and listened for the telling signs. Distant static, the creak of a hatch, the rustle of boots on gravel. At sunrise, Duke lifted his head and growled, spine stiffening. I sat up. The window curtains fluttered, though no breeze blew. That same coppery scent, sharp, metallic, wafted in. I swung my feet out of bed and padded to the window. I drew the curtain aside a crack and squinted at my driveway. Nothing visible. I exhaled. Then I saw it. A smear of rust-colored dust on the center of my lawn, leading up to the front porch, about the shape of that handprint on the silo hatch. The smear ended at the steps, as if someone had climbed onto the porch one-handed. Duke snarled and lunged at the door, but I held him back. I reached for my phone, but it no longer worked. No bars, no signal. My pulse hammered. I grabbed my flashlight and slipped into the hallway. I crept down the stairs, Duke following, each step whispering on the carpet. The front door stood ajar, though I locked it every night. I pressed my back to the wall and shone my light across the dark foyer. Dust motes drifted in the beam. Nothing moved. The handprint was not there, just the smear of dirt on the porch. I exhaled, but my breath caught when the flashlight beam fell on the front window. 3 hand-sized smudges pressed from inside the glass. They were spaced apart, like eyes watching me. I swallowed, teeth tingling. Duke whimpered. I flicked off the light and slipped outside, closing the door behind me without a sound. The hand smears were less visible from the outside, but I could see where someone, or something, had pressed against the glass. I urged Duke to follow, backing down the steps. My phone lay at the bottom, screen shattered, static crackling faintly through the broken speakers. I picked it up. A single text message. Marcus. No sender ID. My blood turned to ice. I yanked open the cruiser door and clambered inside. The dashboard clock read 6:03 a.m. I dropped the shattered phone on the seat, started the engine, and peeled out of the driveway, gravel spraying in my wake. As I passed the precinct, lights switched on in the windows. Ward's silhouette stood at the front door, hands on hips, watching me drive by. I didn't glance in the mirror. I headed south to the edge of town, where fields stretched for miles. The ridge silo sat dark and lifeless at the horizon, trimmed in shadows. I drove past the boarded caretaker's shack and parked on the shoulder. Duke leapt out and sniffed the ground, tail between his legs. I stepped out, watching the silo through binoculars. No lights, no movement. The wind was still, like the world was holding its breath again. Duke growled low in his throat. I flipped on my flashlight and walked toward that sealed hatch buried under debris. I brushed aside leaves and pine needles, revealing the welded cover. The fresh scratches were gone, smooth from morning dew. I knelt to inspect the welds, cold, unbroken. I pressed my palm to the metal. It was damp. Under my fingers I felt a faint pulse, like a heartbeat measured in seconds. My breath caught. The ground around me trembled, slow at first. Then, in a series of thuds, 3 distinct beats, then a pause, then 3 again. The cadence echoed my own racing heart. I grabbed Duke's collar and yanked him back. My flashlight beam flickered, then went out. Darkness swallowed us. I heard a whisper from the hatch. Marcus. My flashlight clicked back on, and I shone it at the welds. They were splitting, thin cracks spidering out like veins. I scrambled backward as a low rumble rose, a deep, resonant vibration that shook the earth. The hatch buckled, curling upward, revealing blackness beyond. Shapes pressed against the opening, fingers splayed across steel, too long, too pale, and their eyes glinted in a flicker of light that seemed to come from inside the earth itself. I fumbled for my radio, but there was nothing. No signal, no voice. Duke yelped, lunging forward, but I yanked him back. The shapes receded slowly into the hatch, which snapped shut with a hollow clang that echoed over the fields. The wind picked up, scattering leaves in spirals. My flashlight died again, leaving me blind. I held Duke close, chest pressed against his fur, and waited. The hatch shook one final time, 3 pulses, and then the ground fell silent. No heartbeat, no thud, just night settling again. I don't know how long we stood there. My knees gave out, and I dropped to the ground, shotgun held loosely by my side. Duke whined and circled me, nose to the hatch. I patted his head. "It's over," I whispered. But I knew it wasn't. When the first rays of dawn stretched across the fields, I saw fresh tracks in the gravel. 3 sets of prints leading away from the hatch, heading north, back toward the town. I stared after them, heart hammering. The prints faded into the woods, into places no road led, and yet they were there. I slung my shotgun over my shoulder, hoisted Duke's leash, and turned back toward home. The shapes had texted my phone. They had found the hatch, broken their chains, and now they were walking free in Archville County. I realized then that this wasn't about sealing tunnels or covering up reports. It was about warning anyone who'd listen that something walked the night, knew my name, and was coming for everyone in its path. But by the time I reached my cruiser, the tracks were gone. The hatch was sealed, as if never disturbed, and in my pocket, my phone buzzed with a new message. See you soon. I swallowed hard, Duke at my side, and drove north into the gathering light, knowing that nothing could hide me now, and that whatever they were already here. I woke before sunrise, sleep having fled me sometime around 2 a.m. I sat at my kitchen table, Duke curled at my feet, the coffee pot humming in the corner. My phone, now patched and working again, inexplicably, lay on the table, screen bright with a single unread message. See you soon. I stared at it, heart drumming like a shot in the dark. My uniform lay on the living room couch, ready for the day, a habit I'd never shake. I poured coffee into a chipped mug and watched steam curl upward. Outside, the sky was bruising from gray to pale gold. I tried to tell myself it was over, that sealing the hatch and fleeing the scene had contained whatever we disturbed. At 6:15 a.m., the station dispatcher paged me. Hayes, report to roll call in 10. A summons I couldn't refuse. I set the mug aside, picked up my briefcase, and slung my service weapon at my hip. Duke followed me to the cruiser, tail wagging hesitantly. I won't lie. I wanted to leave him behind. I wanted to drive until the shapes lost my trail. But I couldn't. I closed the door, handed him off to my neighbor on duty, and climbed in. The drive to the precinct was quiet. Every streetlight and stop sign felt laced with menace, as if each could hide a waiting silhouette. When I pulled into the lot, officers filing in glared at me with thin-lipped concern. Word travels fast when you rattle the roots of something dark. I reported in to Sergeant Keegan, who didn't bother with small talk. He handed me a manila envelope stamped confidential. Inside, reports, photographs, and a memo from Captain Ward ordering me to recant every detail about subterranean tunnels, shadowy figures, and missing equipment. My statement was pre-written, my signature awaited. I tucked the envelope under my arm and walked into roll call. The fluorescent lights flickered overhead, making every shadow breathe. Sergeant Mills read names and duties. When she got to mine, she paused, not because I was late, but because the captain arrived behind me, silent as a grave. Ward's cold gaze followed me as I found my seat. Everyone sat on hands, knees, rifles, but no one dared say a word. After roll call, I was directed to Captain Ward's office. The door closed behind me with a click that echoed. I placed the envelope on his desk. He sat behind it, hands steepled, expression stony. "Deputy Hayes," he began, voice low, "we need a clean record. You understand your career depends on full compliance." He opened the report and slid it toward me. "Sign here. No omissions, no embellishments. Then file it with dispatch. End of story." I looked at the line labeled Narrative. It described routine structural hazards, faulty wiring, a misinterpreted alarm, and no mention of subterranean chambers or stalking creatures. I erased my own account of the handprints, the breath on the hatch, the whisper of my name in the dark. I stiffened as I picked up the pen. Captain Ward watched, eyes unblinking. I signed. "Good," he said, sliding the papers back. "Report to your post. And, Hayes, should anyone ask, you were never at that old silo after that first alarm call. Understood?" I didn't reply. I walked out with the envelope in hand, feeling the weight of every word I'd erased. I filed the report. Dispatch logged it. The archive would show no anomalies. I went on patrol, my night shifts stretching ahead in a haze of silence and static. Every call code sounded boring now. A trespasser at the library, a pram left on the sidewalk, a car battery dead in the church parking lot. Nothing worth a broken rib or plunging into tunnels of haunted clay, but nothing worth relief either. 2 days later, I was dispatched to a missing persons call on Silver Pine Road, a gravel byway 2 miles from the Ridge silo. A jogger had vanished at dawn. I drove there, mind wandering back to those cavern shadows. When I arrived, the early sun had turned the horizon orange. The jogger's car was parked at the trailhead, doors unlocked, GPS set to unknown destination. No footprints led into the woods, no prints, period, only crushed grass at the tread edge and a single hand-shaped smear of mud on the driver's door, exactly where someone would brace themselves stepping out. My radio squawked. "To Charlie, this is dispatch. Any update?" I stared at the smear. My thumb hovered. "Hold on," I said, voice shaking. I clicked off my mic. I lifted my flashlight and held it near the smear. The dried mud cracked like a scab. I swallowed. The smear took the shape of a hand. Fingers splayed unnaturally long. Cold prickle in my spine told me this wasn't random. This was an invitation. I backed away. "Dispatch, I'm requesting K9 and backup for possible missing person," I radioed. The reply felt canned. "Copy, to Charlie." ETA 10 minutes. I waited, scanning the woods, but all I saw were birch trunks and dew-laced underbrush. I thought I heard breathing, not the wind, but something slow, deliberate, like someone in full-body armor exhaling. I spun. Nothing. The woods were still, so still I could hear my own blood pulsing. I set off down the trail, Duke at my heels, muzzle low. We went 20 yards before I froze. Tracks, leather-soled boots, code for law enforcement, heading deeper into the pines. My chest tightened. The tracks stopped at a cluster of ferns, disturbed as if something large had pushed through. I swept my flashlight. Nothing but fern fronds, sodden and clinging together in dark clumps, and no footprints beyond. My radio crackled. "To Charlie, update?" I clicked the mic. "Dispatch, find anything?" Static answered. Just static. Then a whisper. "Marcus." Loud enough to freeze me dead. It came from the fern cluster, that thick wave of moisture behind the leaves. My teeth rattled. Duke whined, hair on his back bristling. I aimed my light there, beam flicking across dripping fronds. Nothing moved, but I felt eyes on me, right through the foliage. "Marcus." Again, closer this time and layered, our voices echoing in reverse, garbled, taunting. I forced myself forward. The call of duty overrode terror. I parted the ferns. There, pressed into the mud, not a smear, but a set of footprints. 3 distinct imprints. The jogger's sneakers, Duke's paw prints, and another set, too large and too wide for me, bridging the two. I knelt, pressed my palm to the ground. It vibrated. I slapped at my radio. "Dispatch, this is to Charlie." A bullet of static and then cut dead. No response. I felt the ground shift like it breathed. I scrambled to my feet, heart slamming. Duke growled and bolted back toward the cruiser, dragging me behind him. I leapt in, slammed the door, locked it, and shoved the key in the ignition. The engine coughed to life, and I peeled out of the lot, tires spinning mud. As I crossed the small bridge over Silver Pine Creek, I saw them in my rearview mirror. 3 silhouettes standing at the trailhead, watching. Heads cocked, long limbs straight as struts, fingers curled around the shadows like vines. They didn't move as I passed. They just stared. Silhouettes against the orange dawn. I didn't stop until I reached the station. I burst inside, keys rattling, uniform sodden with dew. "I need orders," I shouted. Captain Ward looked up from his desk. He took in my uniform, my wild eyes, the mud streaked down my pant leg. He said nothing. Then slowly he clapped his hands once. "Good work, Hayes. We'll handle it from here," he said, voice flat. "Report back at 1800 for your next shift." He gestured to the hallway. "Dismissed." I stumbled out, Duke at my side. Outside, the sky was fully light, and normal life had resumed. Mail carriers, joggers wearing bright lycra, kids waiting at the school bus stop. I looked at the bus sign. Bridlewood Elementary. A parent waved to her child. The world didn't notice the three shapes that melted back into the trees behind them. At home, my phone buzzed again. A new message. "You can't hide. No number, no signature." My blood turned to ice. I dropped the phone. The screen cracked on the tile floor, and out of the fragments glowed those three words. I scooped up Duke, raced to my door, locked it, and checked every bolt. I gathered my flashlight and service weapon. I called in sick for my next shift. "Family emergency," I said. "Won't be able to make it." No one questioned why I'd call sick 2 days in a row. Now, I sit at my kitchen table again, Duke at my feet, watching the woods beyond my yard. The shapes are out there, just beyond sight, and they know my name. My part-time therapist says I'm under severe stress and recommends medication. I tried to take the pill this morning, but when I lifted the bottle, it shook, and the pills rattled, sounding like distant footsteps in a hollow. I dropped the bottle, glass shattering on the tile. The fragments gleamed under the overhead light, sharp and indifferent. I backed away. Dawn filters through drawn curtains, but it doesn't reach the corners of this house. The coffee pot sits empty. Outside, the world wakes around me, oblivious. I have nowhere else to go. Whoever, or whatever, these shapes are, they're free and hungry. And now, they're coming. My phone buzzes again. I don't look. I can guess what it will say. "I'm closer than you think." I clutch my flashlight like a lifeline. Duke whines, and I know this is it. The calm before the storm. The shapes will break through my door at any moment, stepping into the light, whispering my name. And when they do, no department, no captain's orders, no sealed hatches will keep them at bay. Because they're already here. I'm Deputy Ethan Hayes, and tonight the world feels hollow. I rolled onto County Road 17 just after midnight, the storm from earlier still clinging to every branch and ditch. My headlights cut a narrow tunnel through the fog, and each bounce of the beam on slick pavement sent droplets flaring like ghostly sparks. My cruiser's engine idled against the hush. I let it sit a moment, listening. Rain tapping the roof, my own breath shallow behind the wheel, and the ache of 12 years of night shifts settling in my bones. Dispatch had flagged the call as interference at Cedar Peak Fire Tower, that old relic that hasn't been in proper use for decades. I knew the route. A gravel turnout off the main road, then a switchback access trail that climbs 3 miles of pine and spruce. It wasn't routine, but neither was it unheard of. I eased the cruiser into 4-wheel drive and edged forward. The gravel skittered under the tires, a crackling drumbeat that echoed off the low ridge walls. Every rock shift made me tighten my grip on the wheel. I stared out the windshield, half expecting a deer or a stray cow. Instead, I got nothing but shadows. Halfway up, the rain let up to a steady drizzle. My windshield wipers thumped in a lazy rhythm, leaving stripes of wet glass I couldn't see through. I killed the wipers to better hear the radio. Static crackled in. The cab before dispatch came back on channel. Voice clipped. "Hayes, are you receiving? Let me know what you see at the base." I answered. "Copy dispatch." I'm roughly a half mile from the turnout. Visibility's low, towers not in sight yet. Static swallowed the rest of the transmission. I slid the cruiser into park and stepped out. Gravel shifted under my boots, each step sending echoes into the darkness. I hooked my flashlight to my belt and pulled on a pair of leather gloves. Rainwater pooled at my ankles. The cold seeped under my uniform shirt, crawling across my shoulders. I thumbed my radio and called dispatch again, but only Static answered. I shook the mic, and a burst of static spat back, then silence. The trailhead was marked by a faded sign nailed crooked to a rotting post. Cedar Peak Fire Tower. The letters were ghost white against chipped black paint. Beyond that, the road became uneven dirt riddled with deep ruts. I climbed into the driver's seat and started the engine. The moment I pulled away, the radio cut in with a low hum, like someone tuning an old radio dial. I felt my pulse quicken. I rolled down my window an inch, bracing against the wind. A faint voice whispered behind the hum, so low I thought it was my imagination. I killed the engine again. "Dispatch," I said, voice low. "I'm hearing something on the line." Sounds like a voice. I clicked the PTT switch and held it, but only heard the hiss of static, then a single syllable. "Hayes." My heart slammed against my ribs. I looked around the dark tree line. There was no one near. No footprints, no glow of a flashlight in the woods. Nothing but the soft patter of rain and the echo of that single word. I eased forward again, careful not to flood the gravel turnout. The beam of my headlights crossed tall tree trunks and, after a curve, picked up the tower's silhouette, a rusted skeleton of metal lattice disappearing into the low clouds. I killed the engine, and the silence returned, so heavy I could taste it. I stepped out and felt every pinprick of rain. I double-checked my flashlight and weapon before I climbed the first section of spiral stairs, each plate groaning under my weight. Halfway up, the static on my radio roared to life, drowning out the world. I pressed the mic. "Dispatch, do you copy?" The roar faded just enough for a voice to slip through, breathless, urgent, crackling. "Help. Me." It trailed off into static. I froze, chest tight. The stairs below rattled with wind, but I dared not move too fast. I tapped the speaker grill. "Whose voice is that?" No reply, only a drawn-out wheeze of static. At the cabin entrance, I found the door swinging, sash creaking on rusted hinges. My flashlight beam danced over peeling paint and warped wood flooring. I stepped inside, boots thudding softly. There was only one piece of furniture, an old metal desk bolted to the floor. On it sat a field radio, obsolete by at least 30 years. Its power light glowed dim green, defying the county's outage. I leaned close, switching frequencies on my hand mic. The radio's dial spun on its own, fingers on invisible knobs. I pressed the mic to my lips. "This is Deputy Hayes. If anyone's here, identify yourself." Static answered, filling the room with a high-pitched flutter. Then a voice, muted by static but clear enough to catch my name. "Hayes, you're here." The hair on my arms bristled. "Who is this? Where are you?" I clicked the volume knob. The voice grew stronger, older, raspy, carrying the weight of dread. "I'm trapped. Beneath." It cut away again. I shone my flashlight across the cabin, searching for signs of life. No footprints, no blood, no gear. Just the field radio, its antenna bent and corroded, and a single muddy boot on the floor near the desk. I crouched and picked it up. Size 10, scuffed leather, tread filled with pine needles and clay. I felt a flicker of anger in my chest. Someone had been here, left behind their boot, and maybe timed this call. I tapped the boot against the floor. Who left this here? The radio crackled. "I'm Alex." The name hit me like a punch. I recognized it from old dispatch logs. Alex Monroe, a volunteer fire watcher who vanished from this tower in 2002. His file said he never made it back after a sudden storm. They assumed he'd slipped on the stairs, injured his leg, crawled down the trail, and succumbed to exposure. No body was found. My lungs burned as I exhaled. "Monroe?" I hissed. The cabin felt suddenly smaller, suffocating. I argued with myself. No way was this possible. But the radio dripped with his voice. They came when I found it. Papers, proof, bullying me into silence. The dial jerked again. Get, pictures, survey marker, South Ridge. That last fragment froze me. South Ridge survey marker lay 2 miles up the west side of the mountain, beyond the main trail. I should have called for backup, should have waited for state officers. But Monroe's voice was real. His panic leaked through the static. He needed help, or maybe something darker did. I holstered my flashlight and radioed dispatch. Hayes to dispatch. "I need assistance at the cabin. Over." Nothing but static. I climbed down those metal stairs faster than I'd ever moved, mud sliding under my boots. Back at the cruiser, I ripped the door open and threw my gear inside. The moment I fired up the engine, Monroe's voice cut through the static again. Louder. "Don't trust them. Protect. Evidence." The engine thundered, drowning out the radio. My knuckles bled from the wheel, but I didn't slow until I reached the safety of solid ground. Once the beam of my headlights cleared the tower, I dared a glance in the rearview mirror. The tower's cabin window glowed green, as if mocking my doubt. My pulse pounded. I flicked on the dash cam and panned its view. The road behind me, the turnoff, the tower swallowed by dark trees. Then, faintly, I heard Monroe's voice one last time. "I'm here. Waiting." The night swallowed his words, and the ramble of gravel under my wheels carried me away toward dispatch, toward answers I wasn't sure I wanted. I'm Deputy Ethan Hayes, and I've driven this stretch of asphalt more times than I can count. Rain still dripped from the pine boughs after the late summer storm, turning County Road 17 into a ribbon of slick obsidian under my headlights. My cruiser's engine idled at the gravel turnout, the blades of wet gravel hissing beneath the tires. I leaned forward, squinting through the mist. Nothing moved, no stray animals, no wayward headlights on the distant highway, just the blur of tree trunks and the narrowing beam of my headlamps. Dispatch had tagged the call as audio interference at Cedar Peak Fire Tower. Routine flag? Towers decommissioned, rarely anyone up there. But if a ham operator was picking up a transmission, I had to investigate. It was past midnight, the county's grid still knocked out, and every household lantern glowed faintly through living room windows in the valley below. My uniform was damp with condensation, and the ache in my shoulders reminded me I was 12 years into night patrols. I flicked the wiper lever once, too slow, and killed it. Better to hear any crackle on the radio. I killed the engine and stepped out onto gravel. The air was sharper than it had any right to be in late September. A chill that settled into my bones, telling me winter would come. I thumbed my radio mic and called dispatch. "Hayes to base. No visual on tower yet. I'm at the turnout. Heading up the trail." Static answered. I paused, listening. My breath puffed in short bursts. Behind me, the storm's distant thunder whispered off the ridge, a reminder that isolation in these parts could be deadly. The access trail began in a rutted track. First, merely muddy, then carving deep ridges through clay and pine needles. I slid into low range, creeping forward. Gravel skipped and spat under the tires before I hit thick mud. The last rain had filled the puddles to obscuring depth. I inched forward until a jolt shook the cruiser. Front bumper hit a hidden rock. I killed the engine again and climbed out, boots crunching on gravel. I grabbed my flashlight and hatchet, standard for rough climbs, and hoisted the beam toward the darkness. Half a mile up, the wet ground gave way to a faint path where trucks had churned ruts wide enough to swallow a foot. I climbed out and grabbed my flashlight strap. The moment I stepped onto the trail, the mine of memories opened. Nights chasing drunk drivers, skidding over the berm, lunging for the wheel as tire treads lost purchase. But last night's terror was different. Every shadow felt alive, every branch snap a warning. I texted dispatch. On foot now. Trail conditions bad. Might take me a while. My phone died instantly. No grid, no cell signal. I shrugged and switched on the flashlight, its beam stiff and linear against the black. I began to climb, hatchet in one hand, flashlight in the other. Rainwater dripped off leaves, landing on my shoulders like cold pins. Gravel and pine duff slid underfoot. I kept each step low and cautious. 30 minutes in, I heard it. A low hum, like a diesel engine idling far off. But this place had no power lines, no generators. I halted, chest tight, and pointed the beam through branches. No lights, just tree trunks shimmering slick with moisture. I clicked the radio, static, then, barely audible, a whisper. Deputy, Hayes. My heart shot up to my throat. I jerked back, swung the beam around, but saw nothing. I stayed still for a long breath, waiting for my pulse to fall. I keyed the mic. Hayes here, identify yourself. Static roared as if offended. I felt the hairs on my neck prickle. The voice came again, closer now. Hayes. Then gone. I swallowed hard and pressed on, clenching my teeth. At the switchback, I paused to rest. My calf muscles burned, and my chest heaved like I'd run. The tower should be just ahead, beyond a rise. I wiped sweat from my forehead despite the cold. My flashlight illuminated wet bark and tangled underbrush. The path leveled off, and I broke into a clearer glade. Bracken ferns brushed against my knees. Ahead, a tall metal crossbeam formed the entrance to the spiral staircase. Rust bloomed along every weld. I climbed the stairs 2 at a time, metal shrieking under my boots. Every squeal echoed up the shaft, mixing with the moan of wind through the trees below. Rainwater formed rivulets along the stair treads. My flashlight's beam bobbed over each ridge. I paused halfway up, panting, and hit the PTT switch. Hayes to dispatch. I'm at the mid-level. Still no signs of any. A flicker through the static interrupted me, like an electric gasp. Below. The single word cut in as if someone had stolen the air from my lungs. Who below? I demanded. Silence returned. My flashlight's battery flickered. I tapped its side until the beam steadied. Above me, the cabin door was a dark slit against blurring clouds. I climbed the last flights, boots scraping. Then I stood at the entrance, heart pounding. A sickly glow leaked from the window seams. The old field radio inside was powered, its green light pulsing softly in the storm-dark cabin. I stepped inside. The smell of mildew and rust was thick, and the floorboards creaked under my weight. My flashlight caught the desk. A metal field radio, dials spinning as if possessed. No one else in sight. I drew my weapon and rested a finger on the trigger guard. The pulse of rain on the roof sounded distant now. My radio, still clipped to my belt, let out a burst of static. I knelt by the desk and reached out, fingertips grazing the radio's surface. The dials stilled. I keyed my mic. "Hayes here. If you're in there, speak up." Static answered. Then came a ragged inhale behind the static, like someone breathing through a torn lung. I clicked the volume knob. The voice surfaced, hollow, aged. "Help. Me." It cut away before a name formed. I held my breath. "Who is this?" The static throbbed, then, one word, clear. "Monroe?" My wristwatch read 1:17 a.m. Alex Monroe vanished from this tower in 2002. They'd assumed he'd slipped, broken his leg, and died trying to walk out. No body ever found. My hand trembled around the weapon. "Alex Monroe?" I whispered. The radio crackled, and his voice returned, sharpened with panic. "They're using it, covering it up. Timber harvest, off-limits zone. I recorded it all." His tone broke, fear riding each word. My mind raced. Reports of illegal logging in protected forest had drifted through dispatch months ago. Rumors, nothing solid. Monroe's voice seemed tethered to eternity, as if every night he broadcast into the storm, praying someone would come. I swung the flashlight around the cabin. No boots, no tools, just Monroe's voice, and that boot on the floor, size 10, muddy as fresh clay. I slid the boot toward the radio. The desk lamp flickered. Rain hammered the roof. I keyed my mic again. "Deputy Hayes, I believe you. Tell me where to go." Static roiled like angry bees. Then Monroe's voice, nearer, desperate. "South Ridge survey marker. Dig there. Proof." The radio went dead, the green glow extinguished. The cabin plunged into darkness. I forced my legs to move, descending the stairs backward, eyes on the rail. Each step was a plea to gravity. Outside, the wind whipped through pines, carrying the scent of moss and wet earth. I staggered to my cruiser, loaded my gear without another thought, and pointed the headlights downhill. As the engine roared to life, I heard one last crackle in the radio. "Hurry! They'll come for you." Then, silence. I tore down the trail toward South Ridge. My mind ran on panic and purpose. I believed Monroe. I believed there was evidence buried beneath that survey marker. And I knew, deep in my gut, that I was alone against something much larger than a missing man on a misty mountain. Something I could feel watching me from every shadow, waiting for me to fail. I tore through the underbrush toward South Ridge, my boots cutting through wet ferns, my breath ragged in the cold night air. The moon had slipped behind storm clouds, and every step echoed in the darkness, as if betrayal itself were following close behind. I held the pack containing Monroe's box tight against my chest, feeling its weight, papers, photos, the leech-thick mud still caked to the corner of the lid. My flashlight bobbed ahead of me, its beam trembling over roots and rocks. I kept expecting headlights or the drone of a motor, but the forest was unnervingly still. Only the drip of rain falling from leaf tips and the rhythmic thump of my own heart filled the silence. Pines arched overhead, their trunks blotting out what little sky remained. I knew I shouldn't linger. Whoever had chased me from the survey marker would be hunting this ridge until they found whatever I'd uncovered. Yet every muscle in me screamed to stop, to vomit, to collapse, but I pressed on, whether through purpose or desperation I couldn't tell. At the crest of the ridge, I spotted the survey post again, its rusted headplate shimmering dully in my light. I dropped to my knees and wedged my trowel into the clay, scraping rapidly until the hole I'd filled earlier yawned open. The old metal box lay half buried. I yanked it free, tossed the loose earth aside, and slid the lid open. The Polaroids glowed under my beam. Monroe's sham of trees stripped bare, his handwriting accusing every blade of grass, every county commissioner's stamp scrawled in black ink. I rifled through the documents, falsified permits, county memos, signatures that matched names in my own station's phone book. A sudden crash of thunder rattled the loose soil, and I froze. Lightning etched the forest in white, and in that strobing moment I saw movement on the far slope. Gear-clad figures slipping between trees. They'd circled back. My pulse hammered as I yanked the box shut and strapped it tight. I needed to move, but the slope was steep and slick. I slid backward, boots clawing earth, until I reached flatter ground. I dared a glance behind me. 3 men in reflective vests, headlamps cutting arcs of light through the undergrowth. They spread out like sharks on a scent. I drew my service weapon, heart pounding so loudly it felt like it would crack my ribs. My radio lay silent in my pocket. No signal, no dispatch. The forest swallowed my calls. I had to reach my cruiser, parked half a mile downhill at the trailhead. I turned and sprinted, branches whipping my face, torn gloves cutting into my palms. Every 100 feet felt like a mile as I barreled down the ridge. My leg caught on a root, and I crashed forward, jarred by the impact. The box skidded from my pack, but I dove after it, rolling and snatching it up before it clanged against a rock. Pain shot through my shoulder as I pushed to my feet. Blood throbbed in my palm where the trowel had nicked me. I hissed and bandaged it with a torn strip of shirt. No time for tenderness. Behind me, I heard voices twisting through the trees, low, urgent shouts that carried on the wind. "Hayes," one called, over static but clear. "Stop!" My throat went dry. I forced my legs to move faster, lungs burning. The path blurred under my boots, the air tasted of pine resin and fear. After what felt like an eternity, I saw the headlights of my cruiser's dash cam blinking at the turnout. Relief slammed into me, a hot wave that almost buckled my knees. I lunged forward, yanked at the door, locked. My hands fumbled for the keys clipped inside my belt pouch. Rain plastered my hair to my forehead as I fumbled, twisting the key into the lock. The door popped open and I tumbled inside, heart slamming against my chest. I slammed the box onto the passenger seat, my fingers slick with mud and blood. I shoved the trowel into the back, grabbed the wheel, and slammed the truck into drive. Tires spun on loose gravel. I fishtailed twice before straightening out and flooring the accelerator. The engine roared, echoing over the ridge. In the rearview mirror, I saw their headlights. 2 trucks scraping through the trees like wolves. I slammed on the brakes, the cruiser skidding before I swung it around, trying to force enough distance. But the slope was treacherous. Gravel sprayed under my wheels, understeer carrying me toward the ditch. I yanked the wheel hard, tires screeching, barely catching the road's edge. I punched the shifter to 4-wheel, pinning my foot to the pedal. The rear wheels caught and the truck lurched forward. Behind me, the headlights hesitated at the turnout. For a moment, I thought they'd given up, but then the beams flared and one engine revved. They were coming down the trail. Fear clawed at me, but I gripped the wheel. I had to find a way out. Cell service, a marker, anyone who'd believe me. I aimed for the main road. At the end of the turnout, where the gravel met County Road 17, I popped the cruiser onto pavement and gunned it. Headlights in my mirror vanished for an instant. I thought I'd lost them, but the next bend revealed both trucks, barreling down behind me, lights blinding. My stomach knotted. I jammed on the hazard lights and slowed, trying to force them to pass. One truck swung wide, mud spraying onto the road. Its passenger door opened and a silhouette jumped out. Too dark to make features, but he wore the shape of officers I knew. Crisp hat, heavy belt. He held something long and shining. A rifle. I floored the pedal and clattered over a guardrail, tires spitting debris. The road leveled, and I shot onto the highway, headlights pointing toward town. I saw a blinking sign. Welcome to Cedar Falls, 10 miles. Lights from distant homes glittered through gaps in trees. My cruiser's engine screamed. I glanced down at the dash. The box sat on the seat, the Polaroids peeking out of a folder I'd jammed inside. The trowel lay by my boot. Desperate, I dialed the one number left in my phone, the federal environmental agent I'd met at a conference last year. The line rang twice, and then clicked to voicemail. My hand shook as I pressed play on a pocket voice recorder and hit record. I spoke fast, low, my voice cracking. This is Deputy Ethan Hayes, Redwood County Sheriff's Office. I have evidence of illegal logging covered up by county officials. I'm being pursued. Send someone. Cedar Falls Highway now. I hit stop and dialed again. Voicemail, then static. My heart pounded in my ears. Behind me, I heard the twin roars of diesel engines. The trucks had followed me onto the highway. My pulse thundered as I wrestled at the wheel, searching for a way to shake them. Up ahead, the highway forked, left toward Cedar Falls, right toward the station. But that road was narrow and lined with forest, an ambush waiting to happen. I stayed left. A sign for the state police barracks flickered. The buildings were dark, but lights glowed at the dispatch window. I raised my arm in warning, horn blaring. Bright floodlights cut the night as I pulled into the lot. Doors slammed behind me. I leapt out, the recorder clutched in one hand, the box in the other. I sprinted to the dispatch office, pounding on the glass. Inside, the dispatcher stared, eyes widening. I slammed the door open. I've got the evidence. Illegal logging. County cover-up. They're after me. I didn't finish. In the doorway stood two men in work vests, rifles slung at their sides. Their faces were half lit by the glow of the dispatch console. My blood froze. The dispatcher hissed behind me. "You can't bring that here." I spun, heart in my throat. One of the men let a soft click ring out, his rifle's safety off. I raised my hands, voice cracking. I have proof. I have Monroe's box. The beams of radios, the hum of the station's generator, the rain against the windows. It all felt like a trap snapping shut. I forced my shoulders back. They're county men. They'll kill to bury this. I need... One man stepped forward, rifle leveled. His breath steamed in his mask. My throat closed. The second man grabbed my arm, the box in the other. My recorder fell, spinning across the floor. I felt handcuffs snap around my wrist. The dispatcher shrank behind a desk. I heard the echo of Monroe's voice in my head. "They're watching. Don't trust." My world tilted. I was the one they'd set up. The rain drummed on the roof. The floodlights cut through the dark. And I realized that in my search for truth, I'd walked into the very web they'd spun. I swallowed hard, tasting failure. The men hauled me away, and as I passed the dispatch window, a single light blinked on the console. A record light, capturing everything. But would anyone hear? Or would this too be erased, lost to static and silence? I sat on the hard bench in a windowless room, the cuff cold against my wrist, breathing in the smell of damp concrete and stale coffee. My uniform was gone, just a rumpled shirt and jeans now, but the weight of my badge, still tucked inside my shirt pocket, felt like a lead weight over my heart. Across from me, the two men who'd dragged me from the dispatch office leaned against a metal table. They wore the county work vests I'd chased through the woods, but the rifles at their sides told me they weren't road maintenance crews. They were enforcers. Seconds stretched into minutes. The hum of fluorescent lights overhead buzzed like angry insects. I tried twisting my wrist to relieve the pressure of the cuff, but it held me fast. My free hand hovered near my pocket, where I'd secretly tucked the small recorder, hoping its record light was still blinking, capturing every word. My throat felt raw. My pulse drummed in my ears like an alarm bell. One of the men, tall, with a square jaw I'd seen in booking photos of local mercenaries, finally spoke. His voice was low and calm. "Deputy Hayes, you've stepped on some heavy toes. You have information that could bring this county down. We can't have that." He reached into his vest pocket and pulled out my journal, Monroe's tattered leather book. He flipped it open, eyes scanning the stained pages. "This guy Monroe had you running circles all night. You dug up some dirt on timber deals and now you expect to save the day? Sit down." I kept my gaze on his face but refused to step closer. "You're not law enforcement," I said. "You're criminals. You killed Monroe." The words came out hoarse, but I held to my conviction. The lie sparks in his eyes told me he'd been trained to remain calm under threat. He clicked his tongue. "Monroe was an unfortunate casualty. Our operation needed him silenced. But you're just blown in with a badge." He gestured to his partner who crossed his arms. "We don't want to hurt you, Deputy. We want your cooperation. Sign a statement. You misidentified our harvest as illegal. They gave us a permit. Someone at your station signed it. Remember that." His tone hovered between threat and promise. I swallowed. If I signed, I'd be complicit. I thought of the photos, the stumps in the protected zone, the falsified document stamped by the commissioner's office. I thought of Monroe's last entry, begging me to send his proof to federal authorities. I clenched my jaw. "I'm not signing anything." He shrugged. "Then you'll be held until we figure out what to do with you. Maybe we'll frame you for poaching. We found bullets in your car. Did you know that?" He reached into his vest and laid a small caliber under my nose. "They'll say you tried to shoot timber crews. You'll be lucky if they only lock you up for life." I looked at the bullet. I remembered how I'd loaded that magazine after Monroe's transmission at the tower. I'd never removed the unspent round. They'd photographed it, used it as evidence. I stood silent, balancing fear and fury. Behind them, a lone camera lens peered through a one-way mirror, recording this confession. Footsteps approached. The door clicked open, and a man in a sheriff's uniform stepped in. His face was familiar. Lieutenant Keller, my second in command. Relief and betrayal tangled in my chest. He gave me a nod, but his eyes flicked to the rifles by the conspirators. "Everything okay in here?" he asked, voice clipped. The tall man in the vest looked to Keller, his expression neutral. "Just formalities," he said. Keller cleared his throat and smiled thinly. "Deputy Hayes, come with me." He produced a key and uncuffed me. My shoulder cramped where I'd pulled against the bench, but I held back the wince. The vest men watched silently. Keller steered me down a corridor lined with peeling paint and flickering lights. I kept pace, every step echoing. When we reached a nondescript cell, he trembled slightly. "I'm sorry," he whispered. I tried to call backing, but they cut the lines. They set you up. Keller's lower lip quivered. "You need to get out before they decide otherwise." Before I could answer, the two enforcers materialized at the end of the hall. Keller's face went pale. "Deputy, now. Through that door." He shoved me inside and closed the latch behind me. I pressed my ear to the door. In the corridor, voices rose. A scuffle, a curse, then silence. A gunshot. My heart slammed. The door rattled. I turned, spotting a small window high on the wall and the toilet tank below it. I kicked the door handle. It held. I checked my pockets. Flashlight gone, gun gone, cuffs gone. Keller must have slipped me a tool. In my hand was the recorder, and taped to its side was a slender file, Monroe's photos. Keller had sacrificed it all to give me a chance. I knelt by the toilet tank, pried off the cover, and rummaged inside. The pipes rattled, and I heard heavy boots pacing nearby. I found a thin piece of metal, likely a guard's handcuff key or broken clip. My wrist flexed, and I moved to slip the metal between the latch. After 3 minutes of muffled strains, I heard the click. The door sprang open, and I slipped out like a shadow. Ahead, the corridor split. One way led back toward the dispatch office, probably a trap. The other toward a dimly lit stairwell. I chose the stairs. At each landing, I paused, listening for footsteps or the drone of a generator. The shaft smelled of rust and mildew. I descended 3 flights, emerging in an annex that opened onto the back parking lot where my cruiser sat. No one in sight. I crept across wet asphalt, heart drumming in my ears. The box of evidence lay behind the wheel, rain dripping off its corners. I shoved it into a trash bag I'd fished from a dumpster and carried both into my arms. My radio mic, repaired when I was first cuffed, clipped to my pocket, but no signal came through. I cursed under my breath. I'd have to leave the county to make the call. I ducked behind a row of patrol cars, checking for headlights. The night was still. I slid into the cruiser, dropping the recorder next to the evidence box. I worked the ignition, dead. Batteries had been drained. My chest tightened. My eyes flicked to the gas cap. I had no choice. I shoved the box and recorder back in the trunk, opened the rear door, and climbed out again. I sprinted across the lot toward the station's perimeter fence. It was tall, barbed at the top, but the lower rails were loose. My boots slapped on gravel. I vaulted the fence, snagging my shirt on the wire. Pain split my forearm, but I pulled free, bleeding and bruised. On the other side was the county road. Rain had started again, a steady drizzle turning the asphalt slick. I jogged to the edge and turned left, toward the small town of Cedar Falls where the state police barracks stood. My shoes squished. In the storm darkness, I felt watched. Shadows lurked between streetlights. Once I reached the junction, a sign pointed 3 miles to Cedar Falls Station. I kept my head low, the trash bag slung over one shoulder. My phone was dead, but I had the recorder. If I could get it online, federal investigators would have Monroe's words, the photos, the forged permits. They'd hear the conspirators load their guns, the sheriff's lieutenant vouch for me. They'd hear the gunshot in the hall and my flight down the stairs. It was proof they'd armed civilians and framed a deputy. By the time I reached the state police gates, my shirt was soaked through, blood from my arm mingling with rain. A guard spotted me and called out. I raised my hands, holding the trash bag above my head. "Please, federal evidence, county cover-up, call inside." He hesitated, but when I dropped the bag at his feet and pointed to my shoulder, he called inside for a lieutenant. A woman in state-issued jacket came out with a revolver trained on me. I swallowed, voice breaking. "I'm Deputy Ethan Hayes, Redwood County. I have evidence of illegal logging sanctioned by county officials. They're armed and trying to kill me. Monroe's proof is here." I forced a half step forward. She lowered the weapon but kept aiming. "Get help," I rasped. "Call federal agents, protect this." She nodded, adrenaline in her eyes. I sank to my knees, exhausted. The rain pounded my shoulders. My breathing was ragged. Behind me, the station's door swung open. Flashlights swept the ground. Uniformed state troopers emerged, rifles raised. I shut my eyes, waiting for the worst, until the trooper leader barked, "He's one of us. Move in." They fanned out, securing the lot. I slumped against the fence, entire body trembling. My recorder had captured everything. Monroe's voice, the rifles clicking, the county workmen threatening me, Keller's apology, it was enough. As they led me inside, I felt tears mix with rain on my cheeks. I'd survived, but at what cost? I was battered, bruised, and hunted. The storm still raged outside, but I heard the distant wail of sirens, state police backup, and somewhere, federal authorities racing to untangle the truth. I exhaled, voice barely a whisper. Monroe, we did it. But as the door closed behind me, sealing me away from the storm, I realized this fight had just begun, and no one knew how far they'd go to bury the evidence again. I shook off numbness as troopers fanned out around the lot, their beams cutting swaths through the torrential rain. I huddled under an awning beside the station's back door, my jacket soaked through, rainwater running in rivulets down my face. The trooper lieutenant guided me inside, away from prying eyes. I carried the trash bag with Monroe's box as if it weighed nothing, because every ounce of proof inside felt lighter than the dread in my chest. Inside the cramped entryway, warm air hit me like a wave. The fluorescent lights buzzed overhead. I set the bag down on a clipboard-strewn desk. The lieutenant cut the top open and withdrew the metal box first, then the recorder. I watched as he flipped on the recorder's play button. In an instant, Monroe's gravelly voice crackled through the station's speakers. They came at dawn. Bossman said I'd given him no choice. Cameras and papers in the cabin. They'd never let me leave alive. I rigged the radio to broadcast my plea, but it's only heard in storms. If you find this, send it to feds. I can't run anymore. The room fell silent, save for the hiss of that final sentence and the rain on the roof. He pressed stop. Then he looked over at me, eyes wide. Deputy Hayes, this is federal jurisdiction. We need to secure all entry and exit points at the county. Town's already been compromised. He grabbed his radio mic. I tucked Monroe's journal and photos under my arm, heart pounding. Yes, Lieutenant. My voice came out steadier than I felt. They ushered me into an interview room 2 doors down, a table bolted to the floor, 2 chairs. Federal agents arrived within minutes. 2 men in plain clothes, badges on lanyards. One introduced himself. Special Agent Ramirez. He had dark circles under tired eyes. Deputy Hayes, thanks for bringing us the evidence. We'll need your written statement, but first, we want to hear exactly what happened from your perspective. He gestured to an empty chair. I sat, my shoulders heavy. I told them everything in short, clipped sentences. The tower call, Monroe's voice, the survey marker, the ambush, my flight through the woods, the setup at the dispatch office, Keller's rescue, and my escape to the state police. Ramirez took notes, pausing me only to ask clarifying questions. "You're certain Monroe broadcast only during storms?" he asked. I nodded. "And the county enforcers were armed with rifles, identical to your station's weapons?" He frowned. "Yes." His journal mentioned falsified permits signed at the commissioner's office. Ramirez tapped his pen. "We'll need that journal and the Polaroids." I slid the leather-bound journal across the table and handed over the photos. Each flip of pages felt like placing another piece of trust in their hands. All I could think was, if they failed to act, Monroe's voice would still echo in the storm's static, and my life would be forfeit. Ramirez nodded gravely. "We'll secure these. You're safe here." I managed a half-smile. For now. I felt raw, physically and mentally drained. Agent Ramirez noticed. "Why don't you go get dry clothes and something to eat? We'll handle the paperwork." He stood. I rose slowly. "Thank you." He nodded and stepped out. In the hallway, I slumped against the wall, closing my eyes. The water from my hair dripped to the floor. My sandwich lay untouched in a plastic bag on the desk. My phone still had no service. I felt lost, like I'd been submerged in dark water and had only surfaced by luck, or by Monroe's decades-old desperation. An internal door opened. Lieutenant Keller stepped out, uniform muddy beneath his jacket. He looked haggard but relieved to see me standing. "Hayes," he said quietly. I held up my hand. "Don't. Not now." He winced, stepping back. I tried to protect you." Guilt twisted my insides. "You did what you could." I kept my voice low. "They're everywhere." He swallowed. "I've secured dispatch logs and station cameras. The county crew's been blocked at every exit so far." I rubbed my temples. "Good, but the commissioner's office, records could be cleaned before morning." He nodded. "Federal agents will hit that next." His voice cracked. "You should?" He paused. "You should rest." I gave a curt nod and headed for the locker room. I changed into dry clothes, shirt, jeans, boots, still damp, but layers of fleece underneath. The sandwich sat on a bench. I ate it cold, every bite brick-like in my stomach. I washed the mud from my hands and stared at the fluorescent glare. No mirror, but I saw my reflection in the metal dispensers. Haunted eyes, hollow cheeks. I returned to the interview room. Ramirez and his partner, Agent Miller, had set up a small evidence bag next to Monroe's journal. "Glad you're back," Ramirez said. "We've coordinated with state police. They've blocked all county road exits. We're also dispatching a mobile crime lab from the U.S. Forest Service Relief and Apprehension Ward in me." "What about Keller?" I waited. Ramirez hesitated. "He's in protective custody. Possible accessory we don't know yet, but he's cooperating." I exhaled. I trusted him, despite everything. "Good." They slid me a statement form. My hand trembled as I signed my name, and at that moment I felt the enormity of my actions. A deputy who'd risk betrayal, violence, and ruin to unearth the truth. I finished, and Ramirez took back the forms. "We'll ensure Monroe's memory leads to justice." His gaze was steady. "We'll get you help if it goes south." I nodded. The room's walls felt too close. No windows. The storm raged outside, his radio static echoing in my mind. The ceiling tiles above had a faint water stain. Monroe's ghost seemed to linger. I pressed my palm to the cold table. "It's not over," I whispered. Ramirez and Miller exchanged glances. "Agreed," Miller said softly. They stood. I rose with them. Ramirez handed me a cell phone, temporary on the federal network. I dialed my wife's number, voice cracking as I told her I was safe, then pressed the phone against my chest like a lifeline. By dawn, I was escorted back to my cruiser, impounded as evidence, and driven to the Federal Task Force headquarters in Cedar Falls. As we drove, I watched the sunrise break through storm clouds, striping the forest in pale gold. I realized I hadn't slept. 12 years of night patrols had wired me to chaos, but at least the light felt like hope, not dread. At the task force office, I handed over Monroe's journal and photos again. Agents pored over documents, cross-referencing county records, tracing signatures, confirming Monroe's coordinates. They extracted digital copies from the thumb drive I'd recovered. Federal attorneys prepared search warrants for the commissioner's office, county morgue records, and the old fire tower. Gravestones would be disinterred, files reopened, official narratives rewritten. I was offered protective detail from the U.S. Marshals Service. I turned it down. "They need me to testify," I said. "I'll stay close." They respected my decision but warned me to stay alert. I left the building with a federal badge pinned to my coat, a cell phone that worked, and a trembling certainty that I'd never see my county or my life as I once had. That evening, after filing my affidavit, I returned alone to Cedar Peak Fire Tower. The rain had passed. Dusky birds called beneath clouds settling across the summit. I climbed the stairs in fading light, each squeal of metal a memory of Monroe's voice and the violence that followed. At the cabin, the desk radio sat silent, its green light extinguished. I swept my flashlight beam across empty space and listened. Only my breath, only the murmur of wind through broken windows. I placed Monroe's journal on the desk and tapped the radio. "Alex, we did it. They can't silence this now." My words trembled. The radio crackled once like a whisper. "Thanks, Hayes." Then it fell silent. My heart caught. I left the cabin, descending into darkness lit only by a half moon. Back at my cruiser, I realized I'd left a Polaroid on the desk. Monroe's last photo of clear-cut stumps beneath the tower's peak. His final piece of proof. I blinked. In the corner of the photo, scrawled in damp mud, were 2 new words I hadn't noticed before. Not alone. My breath hitched. I looked around. The trees stood motionless. The hush felt alive. A distant radio crackled. Another voice, garbled and faint. I keyed my mic. "Who's there?" Static, then nothing. I exhaled slow, turning the key in the ignition. The engine purred. I drove down the gravel trail under a sky empty of storms but heavy with promise. I realized that even now, I might not be alone on Cedar Peak, and that Monroe's voice, once trapped in static, would keep calling me back to this place where justice and nightmare intertwined.